Good evening, and tonight your strange sleep tour begins in a clay-walled apothecary in ancient Alexandria, around 150 BCE, where dried herbs hang from low cedar beams, ceramic jars crowd every shelf, 2 oil lamps warm the terracotta floor, a fountain drips in the dark, and respectable healers really do insist that lettuce can quiet a restless mind. I am glad Daniel in South London and Maeve in Cork are here again, because they commented on the last video and stayed with me to the very end. Tell me where you are and what time it is, just like Daniel and Maeve did, and if you feel like it, please like and subscribe, so these quiet visits can find you easily each time sleep wanders off. Have you ever lain awake and wondered what a very confident ancient healer might place in your hands and swear it would settle you by midnight? So you step under the arch and let the city fall gently. Damp clay, while the fountain marks the dark with slow, patient drops. It is the second hour of the night. The healer has just bolted the door behind you, and Senex is already rearranging sleep jars by lamplight, apologizing softly for something unspecified as you begin, perhaps rashly, with the gentlest remedies on the shelf, and try not to stare too eagerly at the locked chest waiting at the back. The first remedy is a room with the door shut, the lamp trimmed low, and your body placed flat. Here in Alexandria, that counts as serious medicine, and nobody smiles when the healer says it. You stand in the clay-walled shop while bundles of herbs sway above the cedar beams. 2 oil lamps spread warm amber light across the terracotta floor and the shelves of ceramic jars. Beyond the front arch, the fountain keeps dripping into the dark with patient, useful little sounds. It drips like a servant who has accepted eternity as part of the job. You had expected powders or resin or something mashed into honey with a stern warning. Instead, the healer studies your face and prescribes darkness, silence, and a horizontal attitude. He says Egyptian physicians trust it and Greek physicians approve it, after adding a few extra remarks. This is the ancient world's most severe bedtime instruction, and somehow also its cheapest. Senex appears with a folded linen cloth, a reed mat, and a small clay pillow. He apologizes before handing them over, which suggests he may already suspect one of them is wrong. He squints at a jar label on the shelf, then backs away from it with quiet defeat. After 30 years, he still reads about 40% of the jars as exciting new surprises. The healer leads you through a side door into a narrow room with thick plastered walls. The air feels cooler there, as if the sun had been politely refused at noon. There is no painted couch and no carved bed frame to impress a visiting cousin. There is only the mat, the linen, the clay headrest, and one folded wool cover. The mat is made of woven reed and gives a dry, grassy smell when you kneel. The linen is clean and a little rough, with the crisp feel of cloth dried quickly. The clay pillow looks less like comfort and more like a useful brick with good posture. Senex sets it down gently, as though it might bruise your feelings if placed too briskly. You remove your sandals and place them side by side near the wall. You fold your outer wrap twice and hang it from a wooden peg by the door. Your tunic loosens at the neck, and the cooler room touches your skin in soft strips. Dust settles somewhere in the corner, and nobody feels the need to hold a meeting. Then the healer gives the hardest part of the treatment in a voice of total calm. He tells you to lie down, be still, and stop thinking for a while. You accept the order with the grave dignity of a person who has never once succeeded. The clay pillow lifts your head in a neat, firm angle that ancient necks apparently admired. Your ear catches the faint scrape of linen as you settle onto the mat. The healer lowers the lamp outside the room until only a weak, amber line remains. He says sleep comes more easily when the eyes have nothing clever to look at. That is the whole theory, presented with the confidence of a man billing by expertise. A small silence follows, as if the room itself approves the diagnosis. Then, from the shop, comes the rustle of robes and an irritated clearing of a throat. The Egyptian priest has arrived uninvited, exactly on time for his own interruption. He announces that this remedy was practiced in Egypt long before Greek doctors wrote it down. He says this while pulling a papyrus citation from somewhere inside his robes. You do not ask where the rest of the archive is stored. The healer makes a small sound that means the debate has happened too often already. He agrees that darkness is old, silence is old, and lying down is very old indeed. The priest seems pleased by this victory and leaves as quietly as a cat with paperwork. The door is pulled close, and the room becomes a sealed little pocket of evening. Now the treatment really begins, which is to say that almost nothing begins at all. You place your hands over your stomach, then at your sides, then back again. Both choices feel slightly wrong, as though your hands expected stronger leadership. Your thoughts, of course, do not stop because a professional suggested it in a soothing tone. They line up at once with market lists, old worries, and memories of badly cooked lentils. The healer had warned you about this with the patience of a man who knows minds. He said thoughts may pass through like traders on the street, and you need not bargain. So you let them shuffle by in sandals, dusty and self-important. After a while, the room starts offering small details that feel larger than they did before. You smell old cedar from the beams beyond the wall, and dry mint from the shop. Somewhere nearby, crushed fennel keeps a sweet green note in the air. The wool cover is laid over you when the night cool deepens around your ankles. It has the nice heavy pull of the original weighted blanket experience, sponsored by 2 moderate goats. The weight settles your knees first, then your hips, and the busy little muscles of your chest. You had not realized how much of you was still trying to travel. There is no potion warming in a cup, and no bitter syrup coating your tongue. There is no dormouse fat, no poppy wine, and no hymn remembered only halfway. Even Morpheus, if he wanders past tonight, can hardly take offense at such modesty. Humans are simply lying down in the dark and hoping not to embarrass themselves. Outside, the fountain keeps to its steady work with admirable dedication and no philosophical trouble. A step passes the door once, and then not again for a long while. The silence grows soft around the edges rather than thick in the middle. That helps more than you would think. This, it occurs to you, is essentially the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat. The TripAdvisor reviews, if filed on clay tablets, were probably mixed, but unusually serene. You turn your face slightly on the clay pillow and find the cooler side. That small change feels as grand as a new dynasty. From somewhere in the shop, Senex whispers an apology that belongs to another mistake entirely. A jar lid clicks, then another, and then blessedly, nothing else happens. You picture the shelves outside, the warm lamps, and the tidy rows of sealed medicine. You picture the mandrake in its chalk circle near the back wall, somehow not where it was before. You decide this is not a matter for tonight. The healer later will call this remedy disciplined rest, as though rest needed stricter schooling. For now, it is only your breathing, the wool's weight, and darkness doing very old work. Your body slowly gives up its clever objections. The room keeps its counsel, and at last you begin to do the same. Tonight, the remedy for your stubborn wakefulness is a bath, measured with the care of a jeweler. You stand in the clay-walled apothecary while the healer studies you as if you were a kettle. 2 oil lamps throw amber light across the terracotta floor. The fountain beyond the arch keeps dripping in the dark. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the low cedar beams above your head. Ceramic jars crowd every shelf in patient rows. The whole room smells of mint, dust, old linen, and a little warm oil. You had expected a sleeping drink in a cup. You had even prepared yourself for something leafy and bitter. Instead, the healer tells you that Roman doctors trust water more than gossiping poppy seeds. This is not any bath. This is a bath with a very exact warmth. It must not be hot enough to wake the body, and not cool enough to make it complain. Senex shuffles past with folded towels over both arms. He apologizes before speaking, which is never a promising start. He says he nearly brought the rubbing cloths used for polishing jars. The healer closes his eyes for a brief moment, then he sends Senex to fetch the good linen instead. Senex nods as if this has confirmed his deepest fears. At the back of the shop, a side room has been cleared for the evening. A wide bronze tub sits on a brick stand. Steam rises from it in a thin, patient veil. A stool waits beside the tub for your sandals. A shallow dish holds oil scented with bay and marjoram. A clean sponge rests beside it like a small yellow moon. Near the far wall, the mandrake in its terracotta pot seems closer than before. The chalk circle still rings it in a white loop. Nobody remarks on this, which feels correct. The healer says Roman physicians divide bath water with great seriousness. They do not use numbers. They use hands, wrists, forearms, and the small trews of skin. First, an attendant trails 3 fingers through the water without stopping. If the water clings warmly but does not nip, it is close. If the fingers come out pink, it is too lively. Second, another attendant dips the inside of the wrist. That patch of skin is fussy and honest. It complains sooner than pride allows the rest of the body to complain. Third, the oldest attendant lays part of his forearm along the surface. He waits for 3 slow breaths. If the arm feels welcomed and not startled, the bath may serve sleep. It is, the healer says, a plain kind of science. Bodies are thermometers that argue back. The Romans simply listened to the argument and wrote it down. You are asked to sit while the final adjustments are made. One slave pours hot water from a bronze jug. Another adds cooler water from a tall earthen jar. They stir the bath with wooden paddles in slow circles. The steam changes almost at once. It stops rushing at your face and settles into something softer. If the bath is too hot, the healer says, your pulse will dance. Your skin will flush and gossip with your nerves. You will feel clean, awake, and completely betrayed. If it is too cool, your muscles will bunch like cats under a door. Your breath will sharpen. Sleep will retreat with injured dignity and refuse your invitation. So the desired state lies in the middle. It is warm as sun on stone after late afternoon. It is gentle as bread dough near a hearth. It asks nothing dramatic from you. The Egyptian priest arrives exactly then, because of course he does. He appears under the arch with the serene face of a man bringing correction. He says Egyptians knew the proper bath warmth long before Rome learned to name a basin. He produces a strip of papyrus from inside his robe. Another follows from somewhere even less expected. The healer does not look surprised, which suggests this has happened before dinner many times. You are too sleepy to judge the contest. Both men seem pleased by their own antiquity. Senex, meanwhile, has been told to hold the towel and nothing else. The priest peers into the tub and approves its steam. That may be the highest praise available tonight. He says temple patients often slept well after water like this, provided nobody sang hymns too loudly nearby. At last you loosen your travel belt and step out of your dusty outer clothes. Your tunic goes onto the stool in a folded heap. The linen underlayer follows, warm from your own skin. The air feels cool on your arms for one brief moment. Then you place one foot into the bath. The water receives you with perfect manners. That is the trick of it. There is no shock and no thrill. The warmth reaches your ankle, then your calf, like a conversation already halfway familiar. You lower yourself by degrees and settle into the bronze curve. The tub answers with a faint ringing sound. Steam brushes your cheeks and dampens the loose hair at your temples. An attendant pours a little scented oil into the water near your shoulder. Bay comes first, green and clean. Marjoram follows, soft and sweet, like a cupboard where summer has been folded away. No one scrubs you with any vigor tonight. This is not the hour for heroic polishing. Even the sponge is used with lazy care along your arms and across your tired neck. The healer explains that bedtime bathing should soften the body, not stir it. Hard rubbing belongs to gymnasiums and overconfident mornings. Sleep prefers quieter manners. He has opinions on hot baths after sunset. They can cheer the blood too much. They make some people feel bright, brave, and prepared to discuss philosophy when they should be drooping harmlessly into bed. This gentler bath, he says, is the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat. Your review, if filed on a clay tablet, would likely mention the attentive staff. The Yelp results for overheated versions were, historically speaking, mixed. Senex kneels to test the water again with his wrist. He says he is sorry, but he may have added thyme instead of myrtle earlier. The healer asks whether he is certain. Senex thinks for a while, which is not encouraging. Then he admits he is only mostly certain. The healer decides that mostly certain is acceptable. Because you already smell pleasantly like a hillside. You sit until your shoulders loosen and your jaw forgets its duties. Dust leaves your skin in pale clouds. The day's road seems to drift away in the water behind your knees. Your toes stop gripping the tub floor. Your hands uncurl on the rim. Even your thoughts begin to move more slowly, as if each one has wrapped itself in warm wool. For a passing instant, near the lamp by the door, you think you see Morpheus himself. He glances at the tub with mild offense. Then he sighs at the human habit of turning sleep into procedure, and wanders on. When the healer decides the moment is right, you are lifted out without fuss. A linen sheet wraps around you at once. It is thick, dry, and faintly sun-scented from some long-ago rooftop line. Your skin holds the bath's careful heat. It does not burn away into the night air. It lingers just enough, like the last warmth left in a stone bench after dusk. You are seated on a low couch while your feet are dried. The towel is rubbed between your toes with priestly focus. Ancient medicine has many theories, and nearly all of them include very serious drying. Then comes a thin layer of oil across the wrists and chest. Not enough to shine, just enough to keep the skin from feeling tight. Even comfort here is measured. The fountain keeps dripping beyond the arch. The lamps breathe softly in their dishes. Around you, the apothecary settles into its amber hush, and your body finally agrees with the room. Tonight, the whole shop smells like a wedding garland left beside a warm lamp. You stand in the doorway breathing lavender, rose, and a little honest lamp smoke. The clay walls hold the day's heat, and the cedar beams hang low above your head. Bundles of herbs brush each other softly, as if the shop is whispering in its sleep. 2 oil lamps turn the jars amber, and the terracotta floor keeps a little grit underfoot. Beyond the front arch, the fountain drips with the patience of a hired man. You have agreed to try every bedtime remedy on the shelf, which now feels ambitious. At this point, your standards are low, and your curiosity is surprisingly well rested. The healer has chosen flowers tonight, because even ancient experts like to begin politely. Nobody hands you a root shaped like a tiny criminal, and this already feels promising. On a low table waits a clay censer, a spoon, and 2 shallow bowls. One bowl holds dried lavender heads, pale and dusty, with stems clipped to finger width. The other holds rose petals curled like old silk, dark pink where the shade preserved them. You touch one petal, and it gives a soft paper sound against your thumb. Senex arrives with a 3rd bowl that should contain myrrh, and probably does not. He apologizes before setting it down, which somehow makes the bowl look guiltier. The healer lifts the lid of the censer and checks the coals with a bronze pin. They are not blazing, because good sleep smoke should drift, not charge into battle. You sit on a woven stool while he explains the grand debate of flowers. Lavender cools the head, he says, while rose softens the heart and pleases the nose. This sounds simple until he reaches the part where men argued over proportions for centuries. Half and half had supporters, though those supporters considered thirds a grave professional error. One school wanted 2 pinches of lavender to 1 of rose before the first watch. Another school reversed it after supper because digestion apparently changed the politics of fragrance. You begin to suspect that insomnia gave scholars a great deal of spare evening energy. The Yelp reviews for this remedy were, historically speaking, mixed and beautifully overconfident. The healer measures with 2 fingers, and the kind of focus used for temple taxes. Lavender falls first, tapping the clay like dry rain on a windowsill that does not exist. Rose follows more slowly, because petals cling to one another and resist accounting. He nudges them apart with the spoon, until the mound looks fair to everyone present. Then he adds a pebble of resin, which was not in the first explanation. He says this is optional, which in old medicine often means utterly necessary. The censer breathes up a thin thread of smoke, blue at first, and then silver. You lean closer, and the smell turns rounder, like linen warmed by late sun. Lavender comes to you clean and quiet, like soap that studied philosophy and kept notes. Rose arrives after it, softer and heavier, with a sweetness that settles behind the eyes. The healer tells you Greeks liked this near the bed, especially in winter rooms. Romans liked it too, though Romans preferred every useful thing to feel slightly more expensive. A good house might keep a small brazier by the sleeping couch and cracked shutters. The servant would bank the coals, shake out the linens, and feed the censer. You can almost see the room they mean, with folded tunic, cooled bath towel, and sandals aligned. Essentially the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat, if your review could be filed on clay tablets. Senex returns carrying a fresh lamp wick and pauses before the shelves with deep concern. He asks whether the rose jar was the rose jar or the dried beet jar. The healer closes his eyes for a patient moment that has clearly happened many times. You are reassured when he confirms the petals by smelling his own sleeve. Near the back wall, the mandrake in its chalk circle is somehow nearer the curtain. You decide that good sleep depends on choosing several mysteries and gently ignoring them. Before anyone can discuss roots, sandals slap the threshold with official confidence and dust. The Egyptian priest has arrived again, already offended by Greek chronology and the size of the spoon. He smells the censer once and declares that Memphis solved this matter long ago. Then he produces a papyrus from inside his robe with theatrical but practiced sadness. The papyrus crackles as he unrolls it on the table beside the bowls. He points to a column and says, "Temple sleepers burned flowers 3 dynasties before Hippocrates blinked." No one asks how he knows when Hippocrates blinked, which feels wise for everyone. The healer nods with the careful courtesy reserved for rivals and unseasonal weather. The priest recommends blue lotus with the rose and says lavender is useful but juvenile. The healer answers that lavender lasts better in storage and offends fewer respectable grandmothers. You listen as if fragrance were law, which tonight it almost seems to be. Each man lists authorities, schools, climates, and body types with tremendous sleepy seriousness. Meanwhile, the censor goes on doing its small, honest work without citing a single source. Smoke slips upward, catches the lamp glow, and disappears into the beams like a thought. Your shoulders loosen a little, perhaps from the flowers, or perhaps from the argument's steady rhythm. There is something soothing about experts disagreeing over matters this pleasantly non-urgent. The healer offers practical advice for travelers who cannot carry a brazier safely. He suggests a cloth sachet under the pillow, or petals warmed in clean oil. He warns against soaking everything in wine, because some Romans confuse sleep with forgetting. That is a different trade, he says, and one with louder clients. As if summoned by reputation, a woman's bracelets clink beyond the arch and stop. The healer quietly braces one shelf with his knee before anyone even sees her. The Roman matron peers in, decides the room smells respectable, and asks for something stronger tomorrow. She leaves without touching a jar, which is the closest thing to a miracle tonight. When the door curtain settles, the priest folds his papyrus and reclaims intellectual antiquity. Senex whispers that he nearly handed him beet petals, and looks briefly proud. You breathe once more, and the flowers win by filling the dark with softness. Senex brings you a pillow that smells like a meadow, a pantry, and one small mistake. He holds it with both hands, as if it were a sacred loaf. You sit on a low stool beside the counter and watch dust turn gold in lamplight. The 2 oil lamps make warm pools on the terracotta floor, and the fountain keeps its patient drip outside. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the cedar beams above your head and brush softly together. A row of ceramic jars waits on the shelf with tidy ink marks that mean very little tonight. Senex has tied the pillow closed with blue thread. He is quietly confident about it, which in this shop counts as a medical warning. For many late ancient and medieval healers, sleep could be coaxed through the nose. You laid your head on leaves and flowers all night and hoped your thoughts would follow the scent downward. It is almost an ancient melatonin, now in convenient amphora form, unrefrigerated and faintly like rain. The idea is simple enough to trust, which is why people kept trying it for centuries. Chamomile is the easiest note to catch first. It smells warm and apple-like, as if a field had decided to become polite. Then come the hops, dry and green and a little bitter. They lend the pillow a brewery mood, though thankfully without the singing. Sweet woodruff sits underneath with its hay smell and mild sweetness. Lemon balm should brighten the whole bundle with a soft edge of citrus. Should is doing calm and useful work in this sentence. Senex has already apologized twice, which suggests lemon balm may not be the only green thing involved. He opens the seam to show you the filling, because transparency feels wise after 30 years. Inside are crushed chamomile heads, papery hop flowers, woodruff sprigs, and something that looks like dinner. Senex squints at the jar label again. He says he may have added marjoram or mint, or possibly a garnish intended for lentils. You agree that lentils also deserve a peaceful night. This does not improve his mood, though it does improve yours. The pillow cover is soft linen, washed many times and dried a little stiff. Your thumb catches on one neat patch where an older tear was mended by patient hands. When Senex fluffs it, the stuffing shifts with a papery hush. It sounds like dry leaves moving in a courtyard after everyone has gone inside. This sort of remedy asked very little from a tired person. No bitter cup was needed, and no one had to boil, strain, or chant over anything. You simply laid your cheek on the scented cloth and surrendered to plant gossip. It was essentially the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat if reviews were filed on clay tablets. Some healers liked hops because they believed it cooled an overbusy head. Others trusted chamomile to soften the belly, which medieval people blamed for almost everything. They were not always wrong, to be fair. A heavy supper can still hold a grudge long after sunset. Woodruff had a reputation for sweetness and calm when it dried. Fresh, it was modest enough, but time turned it into a pleasant little show-off. Lemon balm wandered through many old sleep recipes because it smelt cheerful without being noisy. Even a worried mind can sometimes be talked down by a leaf with good manners. Senex says the trick is to keep the herbs dry and the pillow thin. If you overfill it, your neck suffers for the sake of fragrance. He pats the pillow once, and a few seeds click together inside. This is less soothing than advertised, like resting near a very tiny rattle. From the front arch comes the sound of sandals and expensive impatience. The Roman matron appears, and the healer quietly braces one hand against the nearest shelf. She asks whether the shop has anything stronger than scented bedding. Senex hides the pillow behind his back, which is wise on several levels. The healer recommends a syrup and steers her toward the counter with dates. She leaves with a sigh and only one minor collision, which counts as a peaceful visit. When the room settles again, you notice the mandrake pot has shifted nearer the lamp. Nobody mentions it, which has become the shop's preferred method. Senex finally places the pillow on a narrow couch by the wall. The blanket there is woven wool, light but scratchy, and folded with old care. You lie down and test the weight of your head against the herbs. The scent rises at once, green and sweet, and faintly confused. It is not unpleasant. It is simply broader than the recipe promised, as if the garden had invited the kitchen without sending notice. Still, that was often the charm of old remedies. They were practical, homemade, and one label away from becoming family legend. A good sleep pillow needed no rare jewel and no dangerous promise. It asked for clean cloth, dried plants, and enough faith to keep your eyes closed. In monasteries, households, and sick rooms, people made such pillows by hand. They tucked them under linen caps, under cheekbones, and under every theory available. Some swore by rose petals instead of hops. Some added lavender later, once it grew common enough to stop acting superior. Here in Alexandria, the fountain keeps time better than any lecture on humors. The lamps hum softly, and the herb bundles above you trade dry whispers in the heat. Senex waits for your verdict with the grave face of a man near the locked chest. You tell him it smells restful, with a strong chance of soup. He considers this and nods with wounded pride. Then he says that many great discoveries began with a jar in the wrong place. Beyond him, in the dim back corner, Morpheus passes the chalk circle and looks mildly offended. He gives the pillow one long sigh and keeps walking. You settle your cheek deeper into the linen and let the scents blur together. Meadow, brewery, hayfield, kitchen, all of them soften into one slow evening. Under your ear, the hops feel springy, while the chamomile crushes into warmer dust. Medieval sleepers liked that perfume because it lasted until dawn, even when the room cooled and the sheets lost their heat. The fountain drips, the lamps dim, and Senex finally stops apologizing for a whole minute. In this shop, that is almost as good as sleep. The singer stops with his mouth still half open, and that unfinished note hangs above your bedroll like warm smoke. You sit on a low stool in the Alexandrian apothecary. 2 oil lamps throw amber light over the terracotta floor, and the fountain beyond the arch drips in the dark. Bundles of dill, mint, and poppy heads sway from the cedar beams. A row of ceramic jars waits on every shelf, each with chalk marks that look more confident than they should. Your cloak is folded beside you, still cool from the night air. Someone has laid a thin wool blanket over your knees, and it smells faintly of lanolin and thyme. The healer tells you tonight's cure is not a syrup or a plaster. It is a song that refuses to behave properly and end where you expect. He says some sleep songs were made to stop in the middle of a thought. Your mind leans forward for the last step, then grows tired of leaning. This is presented with the calm pride of a man discussing lentils. Ancient Greek melatonin now comes in convenient amphora form, except this batch is mostly breathing and harp strings. He starts with an Orphic hymn to gentle night. The tune climbs slowly, circles once, and then simply leaves the room before the final turn. You wait for the last note. Your ears hold a small empty space for it, like a servant holding a door for a guest who never arrives. The Egyptian priest chooses this moment to appear under the arch. He smells of clean linen and temple oil, and he is already reaching inside his robe for papyrus proof. He informs the room that Egyptian harp songs mastered this trick long before any Greek singer tried it. He says this with the patient tone of a man announcing sunrise. A rolled sheet appears from his sleeve, as if by magic. It contains a copied song for evening rest, and 3 notes in the margin about proper tempo. He demonstrates by plucking a small harp with square fingers. The strings sound soft and dry, like water poured from one clay cup into another. Each phrase settles lower than the last. Then the melody stops one breath too soon, as if it remembered an appointment elsewhere and drifted off. You notice how your own shoulders answer this rudeness by dropping. Even your jaw loosens a little, which feels like a tiny gift. Senex is sent to fetch the Mesopotamian tablet with the lullaby on it. He returns with a fish sauce jar, apologizes at once, and somehow makes that worse. On his second trip, he finds the right tablet. The clay is cool and dusty, and the wedge marks run in neat rows like patient little bird tracks. The healer reads the lullaby aloud in a low voice. It repeats a mothering line for sleep, then stops before the promise is fully tied. Apparently, this is the point. The thinking part of you keeps waiting for the knot, and the rest of you decides a knot is frankly too much work. The Yelp reviews for this remedy were, historically speaking, mixed. Some listeners slept at once, and some merely became very thoughtful about incomplete music. A tray arrives with date paste, watered wine, and warm barley broth. The broth has coriander, a strip of leek, and one heroic chickpea drifting near the rim. You sip carefully while the priest and healer argue in the gentlest way possible about who invented drowsiness first. The mandrake in the corner is somehow 2 handspans nearer the door. Nobody remarks on the mandrake. Nobody ever does. Then the Roman matron arrives wrapped in layered wool and perfume. The healer quietly braces one shelf with his hip before greeting her. She announces that the last sleeping draft was pleasant but unserious. She wants something stronger, but also sweeter, and preferably famous. She is told that tonight's treatment is musical. She settles onto a cushion at once, adjusts her bracelets, and says she has an excellent ear. This turns out to be true in the most damaging sense. At the first unfinished line, she hums the missing note with deep satisfaction. The room sags a little. The whole clever design collapses like a loaf taken from the oven too early, though with much less mess. The healer pinches the bridge of his nose. The priest closes his eyes as if consulting older and stricter gods. Senex whispers that this may be why some temples forbade the audience to join in. He says it kindly, as if discussing table manners. They begin again with an Egyptian evening song. The harp moves slowly, a reed pipe answers, and everyone watches the matron with tender suspicion. She tries very hard to remain silent. You can see the tune collecting behind her lips, like rain behind a garden wall. For a few breaths it works. Then one lovely hanging phrase appears, and she completes it before any mortal can stop her. At this exact moment, Morpheus passes through the back of the shop. He glances at the singer, glances at the matron, sighs once, and keeps walking. Even half asleep, you feel that sigh was deserved. Humans keep trying to summon dreams with Dormouse fat, bad poetry, and now unauthorized harmonizing. So the healer changes the rules. He asks you not to follow the melody at all, but to notice the gaps it leaves behind. You listen to the pause after each string is touched. You listen to the fountain counting drops beyond the arch, and to the lamp oil giving a tiny hiss. The room begins to feel wider. The jars along the wall blur into soft shapes, and the wool at your knees grows heavier and kinder. This is essentially the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat. Your review would mention the service, the soup, and one disruptive Roman widow. A final lullaby comes from the old clay tablet. It rocks back and forth on 2 small notes, like sandals left nudging each other by a bed. Again, the end refuses to arrive. This time, nobody helps it, and the unfinished phrase settles over you like a door left kindly ajar. Your breathing grows willing to copy the pattern. In, wait, out, wait. And then no need to finish anything at all. The priest rolls up his papyrus with a small nod. Even he seems content to let the proof remain incomplete for one evening. Senex dims one lamp, and nearly dims the wrong one first. He apologizes before touching anything, which is still his least restful habit. The matron has finally drifted quiet against her cushion. One hand rests on her necklace, and even her bracelets have stopped making opinions. You lie back on the folded rug and stare at the cedar beams. Somewhere above you, dried lavender brushes softly against a hanging poppy head. Nobody sings the last note. That is the whole secret. And tonight, it is enough. Tonight, the healer will not hand you a drink until the prayer has been said in the proper order. You learn at once that sleep here arrives through careful sequence rather than heroic drowsiness. You sit on a low stool beside the counter with cool terracotta under your sandals. 2 oil lamps make long amber ovals on the clay walls and cedar beams. Bundles of mint, poppy heads, dried rose, and something Senex swears is time hang above you. The fountain beyond the arch keeps dripping like a patient little clock that has never seen Rome. The healer lays out the items for prayer as neatly as a careful cook setting supper. A shallow dish of water waits beside barley grains, a pinch of incense, and a small wool ribbon. A honey cake waits on a plate, though you are very firmly not to nibble. It is for the god, says Senex, with deep professional sadness plainly in his eyes. You expected a quick murmur and a polite nod toward the painted ceiling beams. Instead, you'd have been seated for what feels like the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat. The prayer is for somnus in the Roman way, though the healer lives under Greek shelves. He says this requires respect, timing, and the memory of a tax clerk counting lentils. First, your hands must be washed, because sleepy gods apparently still notice sticky fingers. Senex brings a basin, apologizing in advance, which means you inspect the water with understandable care. The water smells faintly of bay leaves and copper from the jug. You rub your palms slowly and watch thin ripples catch the lamplight. Then the healer straightens your travel cloak, because rumpled fabric suggests a rumpled mind. He smooths one shoulder twice and tucks a loose edge near your knee. You are told not to cross your ankles during the first lines. You are also told this after you have already crossed them. So everyone begins again. Somnus comes first tonight, because he handles the business end of actual sleep. After him come quieter names, named in order, like careful knocks on separate doors. Night is addressed next, because even a god of sleep needs proper room to work. Then the household spirits are thanked, in case they have been shuffling your rest around. The healer says some people kept wax tablets by the bed, so no name was misplaced. Ancient insomnia, you realize, could apparently be managed with notes and determined bedside manners. The words must be steady and exact, with no skipping, swapping, or cheerful improvising. The healer recites them with the grave focus of a man who has restarted this prayer many times. You repeat each line after him, one breath behind, feeling oddly like a very tired chorus. When you stumble over a title, Senex winces before the healer even finishes sighing. Back to the beginning, says the healer, with a softness that somehow hurts more. He touches the incense dish, checks the water, and starts again from Somnus. The incense is not dramatic, which feels almost rude after so much ceremonial preparation. It gives off a thin, sweet thread that smells like warm pine boards and old honey. You watch the smoke curl under the cedar beams and disappear among the herbs. For a moment, the whole shop smells like rain in a forest, only more expensive. The Egyptian priest arrives at precisely this moment, because peace makes him suspicious. He announces that Egyptian sleep prayers were arranged correctly 1,000 years earlier, with papyrus citations. He produces the citations from inside his robe with the practiced air of a street magician. The healer does not look up, which is the only safe way to survive this conversation. You begin again from the start, now with an audience and slightly damp hands. This, you think, is why gods invented dusk, so mortals could have several attempts. On the third try, you remember the order, but offer the barley too soon. The healer closes his eyes for a short moment that contains whole libraries of patience. The barley grains are counted in your palm before they are dropped into the dish. They click softly against the clay, like tiny pebbles agreeing with important paperwork. Then the wool ribbon is tied around the little neck of the storage jar. No one explains why the jar deserves formal wear, and you are too sleepy to ask. Some Roman households tied knots while naming each wish for the coming night. One knot for quiet, one for ease, and one for not thinking about debts. You are warned not to yawn before the final offering, because that counts as breaking form. Even sleep prayers, it seems, are run like small temples or unusually strict kitchens. It is comforting how practical and almost household-minded the old prayers can be. They treat rest like bread dough, where order and timing matter more than inspiration. The healer's voice never rises, even when Senex hands him the entirely wrong bowl. It flows across the counter with the same pace as the fountain beyond the arch. Senex had read the label upside down and bought cumin instead of incense powder. He apologizes before the mistake is fully visible, which somehow makes it more visible. Back to the beginning again, because apparently the gods also prefer clean paperwork. By now you know the sequence well enough to teach a small seminar on sacred bedtime administration. You wash your hands once more and dry them on a square of rough linen. The cloth smells of sun, soap, and the far edge of somebody else's courtyard. When the names are said in the proper order, the room seems to loosen. Even the jars along the wall look settled, as if each one has found its shelf. The Roman matron appears in the doorway exactly then, wrapped in perfume and opinion. The healer quietly braces one hand against the nearest shelf, without breaking the prayer. She asks for something stronger than last time, in a whisper that is not truly a whisper. You hold very still, like a citizen near pigeons, and mercifully no jars fall tonight. At the final line, the healer lowers the incense and lets the smoke thin away. You place the last barley grain in the dish and do not need to start over. In the corner, the mandrake sits a little nearer the wall than before. Nobody mentions this, which feels wise, and also wonderfully in keeping with the shop. For one beat, Morpheus himself seems to pass the doorway, looking mildly offended as usual. He says nothing, only sighs, which you choose to take as reluctant approval. The prayer is finished, and no potion has yet touched your lips. Still, the room has grown softer around you, and your thoughts line up like folded cloth. The healer nods as if the sequence itself were already half the medicine tonight. With the fountain dripping steadily in the dark, you begin to believe him. The milk arrives before the advice does, steaming faintly in a shallow cup of pale-baked clay. You are still rubbing sleep from nowhere at all when the healer asks which sort you prefer. In the apothecary, every shelf already seems to have an opinion about this very simple bedtime drink. Goat milk sits beside sheep milk, and cow milk sulks in a jar with a chipped rim. 2 oil lamps glow amber on the terracotta floor, and the cedar beams above you smell warm and dry. Bundles of mint, dill, thyme, and poppy heads hang overhead like a careful upside-down garden. Somewhere beyond the front arch, the fountain keeps dripping with the patience of a person sorting lentils. It is the most soothing sound in Alexandria, unless you are the mop. You sit on a low stool polished by many restless visitors, and draw your wrap closer around your shoulders. The night air from the street has cooled the linen at your wrists. Senex shuffles between the shelves with a tray, apologizing before he has actually done anything wrong. This is not encouraging, though by now it feels like part of the service. He sets down 3 cups because, as he explains, physicians rarely agree when milk is involved. One is warm, one is barely warm, and one is what he calls moon cool. The healer pinches the bridge of his nose and says Greek writers prefer balance above all things. He says this while staring at a wax tablet covered in ratios that look deeply unready for bed. According to one school, a spoon of honey softens the belly and invites sleep to arrive politely. According to another, 2 spoons are needed, because drowsiness enjoys confidence in a little excess. The Romans, the healer says, often liked the cup richer and sweeter, especially after heavy evening meals. You picture them discussing digestion with the grave care of modern people reviewing mattresses. Then the Egyptian priest appears under the arch, as if summoned by the word sweeter. He produces a folded papyrus from inside his robe before anyone has even greeted him. He informs the room that warm milk with honey soothed Egyptian sleepers at least 1,000 years earlier. He says the Greek version merely added argument and worse handwriting. No one asks for citations, which only encourages him, so a second papyrus appears from another sleeve. While the scholars sort out ownership of sleep itself, Senex begins warming a small bronze pot over coals. He stirs with a wooden spoon, worn smooth at the handle by decades of hopeful insomnia. You watch the skin form on the milk, silver thin and delicate as wet paper. Senex skims it carefully into a side bowl, because some patients swear by it and others flee. The honey goes in next, and the whole room changes smell at once. It is warm flowers, warm straw, and something faintly dusty from the jar itself. You lean closer and see bits of crushed herb glinting in the golden thread of it. Senex notices your face and becomes calm in a way that never means anything good. He explains that he may have used the honey prepared for the mandrake mixture in the corner pot. He adds that the jar labels were close together, and he was sorry in advance. You both look toward the back wall where the mandrake sits inside its chalk circle. It is somehow nearer the door than it was earlier, though nobody says this aloud. The healer takes the spoon from Senex with the slow care of a man handling a family story. He sniffs the cup, tastes a drop, and decides the extra herbs are mostly chamomile. This is received as excellent news by everyone except perhaps Morpheus, who passes the doorway and sighs. He looks mildly offended, like a man hearing his own name mispronounced in a waiting room. The priest objects that chamomile muddies a pure Egyptian bedtime drink, and begins unrolling another citation. The healer counters that sleep does not care about national borders once the eyelids grow heavy. You are offered the least controversial cup first, which is goat milk warmed until steam just whispers. The honey is light and thin, and the taste is grassy, sweet, and slightly wild. It feels gentle on the tongue and richer than water, but not heavy enough to complain about. The ancient world called this medicine, though it is very close to a kind bedtime dessert. The second cup uses sheep milk, and its warmth sits halfway between bathwater and sunlit stone. This one carries more honey, and the sweetness lingers with the stubbornness of a wealthy aunt. You begin to understand why physicians spent pages discussing serving temperature as if writing state policy. Too hot, and the honey vanishes into heat, while the milk turns sleepy only for itself. Too cold, and every spoonful feels like a chore assigned by a very tender bureaucrat. There is probably a clay tablet somewhere rating this experience 4 stars and praising the linens. The third cup is the disputed one, carrying Senex's mistaken honey and a whisper of herb. You drink carefully and wait for drama, but the taste is only deeper and a little greener. Senex seems almost disappointed that you do not immediately speak in prophecies or bark at the moon. Instead, you ask for another sip, which he takes as professional redemption. The healer notes this on his tablet with the solemn care of a temple accountant. He writes that moderate warmth helps, excessive honey clouds judgment, and goat milk suits travelers best. The priest leans over and adds that Egyptian goat milk did all this first. No one gives him the stylus, so he writes this in the air with one finger. Outside, a cart rolls past on the street, and somewhere a dog settles with a soft huff. The fountain keeps dripping beyond the arch, patient as ever with human experiments. Your cup is refilled with the plain version at last, and a thread of steam curls upward. You wrap both hands around the clay and feel the warmth settle into your palms. The milk is sweet, the room is dim, and even the jars seem less eager to advise. In this amber hush, second opinions taste a great deal like sleep. Senex takes away the dangerous honey with dignity, and the mandrake continues its silent, extremely unhelpful supervision. You finish the last warm mouthful slowly, while the fountain drips on, and Alexandria decides to whisper. Tonight the healer brings you a lettuce with the grave face usually kept for rare resins and costly oils. You are ready for powders and prayers, so the leaf itself feels faintly insulting. You sit on a low stool beside the counter, with your travel dust still on your sandals. Above you, dried herbs hang from the cedar beams, and the oil lamps paint everything amber. The terracotta floor keeps a little daytime warmth, and the fountain beyond the arch drips patiently. A dozen ceramic jars wait along the shelves, like calm judges who have seen stranger bedtime plans. Senex shuffles past with a bowl, already apologizing for something that has not happened yet. He says he almost washed the lettuce in rose syrup, which would have been soothing in a different way. The healer takes the leaves from in anyway with the gentle speed of long practice. They are long, pale leaves, narrow at the tip, and bitter even before they touch your tongue. This is not common kitchen lettuce, or at least not the soft round sort you would choose gladly. This is the tall, wild kind, the kind ancient people looked at and decided belonged to sleep. The healer says Egyptians held this plant sacred to a god of sleep, long before Greek doctors praised it. He says this in a careful tone, because he knows exactly who is standing outside. The Egyptian priest enters on cue, smooth as lamp oil and just as certain of himself. He does not sit down before producing a papyrus from inside his robes. It is not his first papyrus tonight, and apparently not his last. He taps the writing with one trimmed nail, and informs the room that sleep lettuce is Egyptian. Not merely Egyptian, he adds, but old even by Egyptian standards, which is saying quite a lot. He produces a second papyrus to support the first, which feels almost theatrical now. The healer does not argue, because he would like to finish your remedy before dawn. You admire this choice, since scholars can stay awake for hours on pure disagreement. The leaves are rinsed in cool water from a glazed jug, and tiny beads cling to the ribs. The healer shakes them dry, then tears them into a bowl with a sound like folded paper. He adds a little oil, a pinch of salt, and crushed dill seed for the stomach. Then he pauses over honey, frowns, and decides sleep does not need dessert tonight. The priest approves this restraint, though only after noting that temple recipes were plainer still. His tone suggests the gods like their supper simple and their citations properly archived. You are invited to smell the bowl before tasting it, which feels almost luxurious. It smells green and damp and faintly sharp, like a garden wall after evening rain. If melatonin had once come in leaf form, this would be the ancient premium version. Unrefrigerated, certainly, and carrying the sort of forest smell modern bottles can only dream about. You take a bite and learn at once why physicians mention this remedy with such solemnity. It is bitter in a way that seems to tidy your thoughts by force. The healer watches closely, hoping for sleep, and perhaps also for gratitude toward leafy medicine. You chew with dignity, because this is still less embarrassing than chanting at moonlight. A Greek physician near the lamp clears his throat and says the effect comes from the milk. He means the pale sap, hidden in the stem, not anything borrowed from a goat. He begins explaining vapors, cooling properties, and the proper balance of a restless body. The priest waits until the speech is finished, then notes that Egyptian temple records said much the same earlier. The physician blushes the color of boiled shrimp, which is unfortunate beneath warm lamplight. You see the exact moment he realizes he is losing an argument to a salad. To recover his standing, he cites a later authority who will someday be named Dioscorides. He says this respected man prescribes lettuce seriously, and in amounts that fill impressive bowls. This helps no one look grand, because the cure remains a very large supper. Even the priest smiles at that, though he hides it by adjusting his sleeve. Senex returns with more leaves, after misreading the jar marked dill, as one marked dates. He apologizes before the mistake is visible, which somehow makes the room trust him less. The second bowl is mixed more gently, and a little vinegar is kept far away. Tonight you are not being sharpened for dinner talk, but softened towards sleep. Somewhere near the back wall, the mandrake pot seems a finger width farther left than before. No one comments on this, because ancient medicine is easier when selective noticing is allowed. You finish the larger bowl with slow obedience, and the bitterness fades into something almost sweet. Your hands feel warmer on the clay cup beside you, and your shoulders stop volunteering for duty. The healer nods, as if lettuce has once again justified a lifetime of study. It is the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat, if your review must be carved later. The priest folds his papyrus with great care, satisfied that history has behaved properly tonight. The embarrassed physician asks, very quietly, whether a little oil improves the effect. The priest lets the silence rest a moment, which is kinder than triumph. Then he says that temple practice preferred plain leaves, but honey was not entirely forbidden. This is how a physician is defeated here, not by thunder, but by garnish. The room accepts it with the calm interest usually given to weather or soup. Another leaf is set aside for tomorrow, wrapped in damp linen on a cool shelf. The healer says the trick with sleep is often repetition, which sounds both wise and tiring. You lean back against a folded blanket, and even the coarse wool feels unusually forgiving. The lamp smoke curls upward in thin gray ribbons, too lazy to trouble anyone. Beyond the arch, the fountain keeps the same small rhythm that all tired minds eventually borrow. Outside, Alexandria still has its carts and voices, but they seem to belong to another room. For one brief moment, a figure at the doorway looks almost like Morpheus himself. He studies your empty bowl with mild offense, then sighs and passes on. The last taste is bitter and green, and even your thoughts begin lying down. Senex uncorks the valerian jar as if he is opening a small argument with the whole room. Before the lid touches the counter, the apothecary smells like damp roots and old rain. You sit on a low stool near the cedar shelves and try not to look doubtful. 2 oil lamps make the clay walls glow softly, and the fountain outside keeps its patient little drip. Bundles of mint, rue, and dill hang above your head like a sleepy upside-down garden. A dozen ceramic jars line the shelves beside you, each with a label Senex has probably misread before breakfast. He shuffles closer with the root in both hands, already apologizing, in case the taste offends you. It is somehow less comforting when a man says sorry before he has even boiled the water. The valerian itself looks harmless enough at first glance. It is pale brown, knotted, stringy, and dusty, like the beard of a very tired hedge. When Senex snaps a piece apart, the smell grows stronger and warmer. Now it seems less like rain on soil, and more like wet forest floor, left in the sun. The healer nods with grave approval, which is never a promising sign where flavor is concerned. This, you gather, is ancient Greek melatonin in convenient amphora form, unrefrigerated, and deeply suspicious. Valerian has one great gift, which is that nearly everyone agrees on it. Greek healers used it for troubled sleep, Roman writers praised it, and Chinese doctors knew the root as well. Later Arab physicians kept it in their own careful lists of calming plants and night remedies. Civilizations may disagree about stars, taxes, and sandal styles, yet this root wins surprising international support. It is almost comforting to find so much human unity gathered around one terrible cup. The Egyptian priest arrives at this exact moment, as if summoned by professional rivalry and root fumes. He slides through the front arch, dusts his sleeves, and announces that Egypt knew calming roots much earlier. From inside his robe, he produces a papyrus strip with great satisfaction. You suspect he keeps several tucked there, sorted by topic, season, and dramatic entrance. The healer gives him a look that says, "This is still his shop." The priest gives him a look that says, "Dates are dates, and papyrus does not lie." Meanwhile, Senex has set a bronze pot over the small brazier by the wall. He adds water from a narrow-necked jar and drops in chopped valerian with a face of martyrdom. You watch the pieces darken as the water warms and the steam begins. The smell climbs into the room in slow gray threads and settles on everything. It catches in your linen sleeve and in the fringe of the woven cushion. It lays a woodland curse upon the figs on the table, which hardly seems fair to the figs. The healer says the root must simmer, not rush, because good sleep dislikes haste. This sounds wise, though it may simply be a way to delay your first swallow. You rest your sandals on the cool terracotta floor and listen to the little bubbling pot. The lamp flame leans when the night air slips in, then straightens again. Somewhere near the back wall, the potted mandrake is not quite where it was earlier. Nobody mentions this, which now feels like a house rule older than the shelves. As the brew deepens, the color turns from weak straw to muddy amber. It looks like broth that once knew a mushroom and has never fully recovered. The healer explains that some people sweeten valerian with honey, wine, or crushed anise. This is ancient medicine's way of admitting defeat while keeping a straight face. Senex reaches for the honey jar, misreads the label, and nearly adds fish sauce instead. He apologizes before the mistake is complete, which remains his special and baffling gift. The healer rescues the cup and chooses honey himself with the calm of long practice. You notice, not for the first time, that Senex is still not allowed near the locked chest. The root goes back farther than one city or one school of learning. That seems to be the strange comfort of it as you sit there in the lamplight. A Roman could grimace at the same taste that made a Greek grimace. A Chinese patient could nod sadly over the cup with exactly the same resigned wisdom. Centuries later, an Arab doctor could write careful notes about the same stubborn smell. Across languages and robes, nobody appears to have recorded, even once, pure delight. That may be the most trustworthy medical review in all of history. The Yelp reviews for this particular remedy were, historically speaking, mixed, but mostly wounded. At last, Senex pours the decoction into a small clay cup and brings it to you. He holds it the way one might carry a lizard found indoors. The steam touches your face first, and it is all root earth and something faintly sour. It smells like a basket of herbs, forgotten under a tree after a brief rain. You take the cup in both hands, because warmth makes bravery feel more organized. The rim is rough against your lip, and the liquid moves thickly, but not quite slowly. Your first sip is dreadful, in a serious and thoughtful way. It is bitter, woody, musty, and oddly green, as if the ground itself learned to steep. The honey helps for half a heartbeat, and then gives up. After that, the valerian returns with the calm confidence of a tax collector. You swallow, and try not to make a face in front of professionals. The professionals make the same face anyway, which feels kindly and democratic. Even the Egyptian priest tastes a drop from the spoon and pauses with deep regret. He then confirms that Egyptian versions also tasted terrible, only earlier and on better papyrus. This is, somehow, not the boast he thinks it is. You take another sip because history has trapped you, and everyone is watching politely. The second swallow is no friendlier, but it is less surprising. That is the quiet trick of most old remedies and many old customs. The first meeting is rough, and then habit pulls a small blanket over the rest. The healer suggests you drink it while warm and keep your mind still afterward. No heavy meal, no loud talk, and no staring at lamp flames like a philosopher. You nod as if you had planned an extremely restful evening from the start. In truth, you had planned to complain softly and rearrange your blanket for an hour. The Roman matron appears in the doorway just then, all bracelets and impatience. The healer reaches out and braces a shelf before she has even spoken. She asks for something stronger than last time and sniffs the valerian with instant disgust. For once, every person in the room agrees with her completely. She leaves without knocking over a single jar, which feels almost supernatural. The room settles again into its rooty, honeyed, faintly smoky peace. You finish the cup in small, brave steps and set it down on the counter. A brown ring forms under the base like a tiny swamp on fired clay. Senex takes the empty cup away as if you have passed a quiet exam. No one applauds, which seems right, because survival is enough on valerian nights. The healer folds a clean linen cloth and places it behind your head. It smells of sun, soap, and the cedar chest where it was stored. You lean back against the wall and let the warmth in your stomach spread. Outside, the fountain keeps dripping as though measuring the dark in calm silver beats. The lamps burn lower now, and the shelves soften at their edges. The jars become round shadows with pale labels and patient little mouths. For a moment, you think you see Morpheus near the far arch, looking mildly offended again. Perhaps someone somewhere has tried to flatter him with Dormouse fat and bad singing. He sighs in the old divine way and drifts on without a word. Your eyes grow heavy in spite of the taste, or because of it. The cure everyone agreed tasted dreadful is quietly doing its plain and ancient work. And in the warm clay room, with root on your tongue and water in the dark, that feels enough. The healer warms the oil between her palms before she tells you what is in it. You sit on a low stool in the clay-walled shop with your sandals beside your tired feet. 2 oil lamps make soft amber pools on the terracotta floor, and the fountain drips beyond the dark arch. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the cedar beams above you, and their dusty shadows sway a little. A row of ceramic jars watches from the shelf, each with a neat ink mark and a doubtful future. Senex has read about 40% of those marks wrong, which he admits before touching anything. He shuffles over with folded linen, a bronze dish, and an apology already prepared in his mouth. The healer takes the dish from him anyway, with the calm speed of long practice. She pours in olive oil first, thick and gold, and the room smells suddenly like late afternoon fields. Then comes something greener and cooler, like crushed leaves after rain on warm stone. She says violet for the head, lettuce seed for the heat behind the eyes, and iris for the mood. Then her voice drops a little lower. Poppy from the capsules, she says, as if telling the lamp a secret. For stubborn wakefulness, she adds, some physicians ask for a touch of mandrake or a breath of henbane. While she says this, she steps between you and the front arch without looking as though she has done so. It is a gentle movement, but you notice it, because nobody blocks a door for chamomile. You nod as if this all sounds perfectly normal, which is now your main skill as a traveler. Ancient Alexandria offers many gifts, and one of them is learning to keep a composed face near unlabeled jars. The mandrake root in the corner is farther from its chalk circle than it was earlier. The healer stirs the dish with a narrow wooden stick until the surface turns smooth and darkly bright. She lets one drop fall on her wrist, waits a breath, then rubs it in with her thumb. She folds back your travel cloak, straightens the edge of your tunic sleeve, and clears dust from your temple. Her hands are cool at first, then warm as the oil spreads across your skin. She works in small circles near your brow, never hurrying, as if sleep is a shy bird. She turns your hands palm up, then palm down, and presses the oil where the pulse moves under the skin. The scent changes as it warms, and now the poppy is fuller, with something sweet beneath it. It smells less like a potion and more like a quiet garden at dusk with very strong opinions. Senex reaches for a jar on the upper shelf and freezes halfway through the act. He squints at the label, sighs, and asks whether this is sesame or shoe glue. The healer sends him to fetch hot water instead, where his gifts can do less harm. When she kneels for your feet, you understand why this remedy has lasted for centuries. A tired traveler will agree to many things once someone offers to rub the soles properly. She holds your ankle in one hand and smooths the oiling with the other. Your skin drinks it up after road dust, hot stones, and several heroic but failing inns. Greek doctors like the temples and wrists, she says, because the body listens there. Roman doctors praise the feet, because the day leaks out through them by evening. Still, it is hard to argue with a thumb pressing gently into the arch after sunset. The fountain keeps time in the dark outside, and the lamps make the oil shine like old honey. You ask whether people truly slept better with this. She says many did. Some imagined they did, and both kinds thanked her in the morning. A good remedy, like a good blanket, sometimes begins with being expected. At this point, the Egyptian priest arrives without invitation, because quiet moments attract him, like figs attract wasps. He slips through the arch, smells the room once, and announces that Egypt used sleep oils long before Greece. From inside his robe, he produces a folded scrap of papyrus with grave triumph. You suspect he keeps several ready for any topic that may arise before noon. She says that is very nice, and asks whether his earlier formulas also included proper footwork, which is the nearest thing to defeat available in this shop. A cloth is dipped, wrung out, and laid for a moment across your eyes. The heat settles the oil scent around you and dims the last sharp edges of the day. Through the linen, the lamps turn into soft orange moons. This is essentially the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat, if your review could be filed on clay tablets. The healer removes the cloth and checks your face with the mild concern of a baker checking bread. She adds one last trace of oil behind your ears, which feels unnecessary and wonderful. Then she names the stronger versions again, even more softly than before. Poppy, mandrake, henbane, and a little resin to carry the smell. She says these are for nights when the mind runs in circles and refuses the gate of dreams. While speaking, she remains between you and the door like a person guarding both exits and reputations. You decide not to ask how many patients tried to stroll home too early. Some facts are kinder when left folded away like spare linen. For a moment, the room grows so still that you almost notice another presence. A figure near the back wall seems shaped from lamp smoke and moonlit cloth. He glances at the dish, looks mildly offended, and sighs toward the ceiling. Then Morpheus leaves everybody to their trade, which seems only fair. The healer caps the flask with waxed cloth and ties it neatly with cord. She writes a mark on a fresh tag, then hangs it well above Senex's reach. In this room, it mostly involves shelves, string, and not trusting the apprentice near the locked chest. Your feet are wrapped in clean linen for a short while, like warm bread resting after the oven. Your hands lie loose on your knees, shining faintly, and your shoulders have forgotten their usual plan. Inside, the oil keeps its whisper on your skin, and the shop grows softer around the edges. The healer begins with the cup, because tonight sleep starts with arithmetic. You sit in the warm apothecary and watch his finger trace ratios in spilled water. 2 oil lamps breathe amber light across the terracotta floor. Beyond the front arch, the fountain keeps dripping its patient little answer to every human worry. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the cedar beams like upside-down gardens. The jars along the wall hold leaves, seeds, gums, petals, bark, and one powder nobody trusts after sunset. The room smells of fennel, honey, dust, and the faint sour sweetness of old grapes. You came in asking for sleep, and perhaps for mercy. Instead, you have agreed to try every remedy on the shelf. This seemed wise before dusk, which is often how these things begin. Tonight's remedy is almost insultingly simple. It is wine with rules. Not much wine, the healer says, not wild wine, and never wine alone. Wine must be softened, guided, and politely introduced to water until it remembers its manners. He sets out a shallow cup, a mixing bowl, and a small ladle with a bent handle. The bowl is cool to the touch and faintly chalky. The wine jar leaves a dark ring on the wooden table. For sleep, he explains, a grown person of means should drink at the right hour. The wine must be diluted in a proper ratio. The talk around it should be pleasant, then softer, then nearly nothing at all. You nod as if this sounds normal and practical. In this room, it somehow does. He measures 1 part wine and 3 parts water. Then he pauses and frowns at your face. For you, he says, perhaps 1 part wine and 4 parts water, because your eyes look like tired figs. Senex appears with a second jug and an apology already half-spoken. He has misread another label. He was carrying vinegar for pickled onions and not water from the cool jar. He apologizes before the healer can object. This somehow makes the mistake feel larger, as if it has entered the room wearing sandals. You are quietly grateful nobody drank it. Fresh water is poured at last. It sounds soft in the bowl, like a small cloth being unfolded. The wine loosens from its shark smell and becomes rounder, fruitier, almost sleepy itself. The healer swirls the mix with the bent ladle. He does not hurry this part. Ancient Greek melatonin, now in convenient amphora form, unrefrigerated, and smelling faintly like a forest after rain. He says undiluted wine excites the body and stirs the mind. That is good for loud men at bad parties. It is not good for sleep. He says the cup should come after a light evening meal. There should be bread still warm in the middle. There should be olives, soft cheese, and lentils dressed with oil and a little crushed mint. You are given a small plate to prove the point. The bread has a floury crust and a chewy middle. The cheese is salty and cool, and the olives leave your fingers shining. A dish of figs appears beside it. One has split at the top and shows its ruby inside. Senex nearly sits on it while reaching for a napkin. The healer chooses a couch by the wall, and tells you to recline, but only a little. Too upright, and the body keeps its daytime thoughts. Too flat, and you look like a person already laid out for opinion. So you settle somewhere between dignity and bedding. A folded wool cushion supports one elbow. The linen under your hand is clean, coarse, and surprisingly comforting. This, he says, is why the wine needs a chaperone. Water is the first chaperone. Good company is the second. Conversation must begin with something steady and easy. You are not to discuss lawsuits, politics, taxes, difficult cousins, or the stars in any serious way. Nothing that makes the mind sit up straight. He suggests safer topics. The quality of this year's figs is acceptable. Sandals with too many straps are a menace. A new shipment of Syrian glass is lovely, though impractical for anyone with elbows. You do your part and mention a ferry crossing from earlier that week. Someone else mentions a mule with excellent posture. Senex says the mule reminds him of his sister's husband, then apologizes to no one in particular. The wine arrives in your cup. It is cool, watered, and almost shy. The first sip tastes of grapes, river stone, and a little wood from the jar. It does not strike the head like a hammer. It sits down beside you like a patient guest. You can see why a physician would approve. In this method, timing matters as much as taste. The cup comes at the hour when work has ended, but sleep has not yet been invited. Too early, and the evening grows muddy. Too late, and the stomach argues with the pillow. The healer speaks of the symposium in the tone of a man discussing weather and digestion. For ordinary pleasure, it may drift where it likes. For sleep, it must behave like a well-trained servant and know when to dim itself. If the talk remains bright and clever past the third hour, he says, the treatment has failed. That is not philosophy. That is poor bedside practice. You imagine learned men sadly ending a debate because it has become medically unhelpful. There is something comforting in that. The Yelp reviews for this particular remedy were, historically speaking, mixed. At this point, the Egyptian priest arrives without being asked. He appears in the arch as if the night itself has sent for him. From somewhere inside his robes, papyrus citations emerge like doves with very strong opinions. He informs the room that Egyptians mastered bedtime wine long before Greek doctors gave it measurements. He says temple records prove it. He says this while accepting a cup with obvious pleasure. The healer lets him talk because the rule allows early conversation. Then he glances at the water jar and quietly doubles the dilution. Peace tonight is mostly a matter of ratios. The priest soon moves on to lotus, dream books, and proper pillow stuffing. His voice grows softer as he speaks. Even papyrus can begin to yawn if given enough warm lamplight. Outside, the fountain continues its small silver dripping in the dark. Inside, the lamps lower themselves into thicker gold. The whole shop starts to feel like the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat, if your review could be filed on clay tablets. Another cup is offered, but only half full. The healer is firm about this. Sleep wants a door opened for it, not a wall knocked down. You notice how carefully the evening is arranged. The meal is light. The wine is tame. The talk begins in company and ends with nobody needing to win. This, more than the grapes, seems to be the cure. The body is given fewer tasks. The mind is not cornered into brilliance. Even the room agrees to help. The cedar beams hold their herb bundles without dropping a leaf. The jars sit in orderly rows, except for one, near the end, that leans because the shelf remembers the Roman matron. Nobody says her name, but everyone glances at the shelves anyway. Precaution has become a household custom. You take another sip and let the cup rest against your palm. It has warmed a little from your hand. The watered wine tastes gentler now, as if it has accepted its job. The conversation has thinned exactly as ordered. No one tries to rescue it. A small silence settles between each sentence, and then stays a little longer. Senex folds a cloth for no reason, except that it is there. The Egyptian priest rereads his own citation and nods off halfway through being correct. Somewhere near the back wall, the mandrake pot seems not quite where it was before. No one mentions it. The healer sees your eyelids slow and looks pleased in a modest professional way. He has not conquered nature. He has merely arranged the evening so nature can remember its habits. That was the dream of this remedy all along. Not drunkenness and not oblivion. Only a cup with a chaperone, a meal that asks nothing, and talk polite enough to fade. You finish the last swallow and set the cup down softly. The fountain keeps dripping beyond the arch. In the warm apothecary, even silence now seems properly diluted. The henbane jar is warm from the lamp, although everyone insists it should remember midnight. You hold it in both hands and try not to look doubtful in front of the healer. You are standing in the clay-walled shop in Alexandria, where dried herbs hang from the low cedar beams. 2 oil lamps make soft amber pools on the terracotta floor, while the fountain drips beyond the dark arch. The shelves are crowded with ceramic jars, each with a wax tablet tied at the neck. Some smell green and sharp, and some smell sweet, dusty, and a little like old figs. Tonight's lesson is henbane, which ancient healers praised for easing restless minds and heavy eyelids. They also wrapped it in rules so carefully that the plant sounds almost vain about timing. You are told it should be cut in the 3rd watch, when the night feels deepest and slowest. It should not meet iron if possible, and the gatherer should speak proper words toward the north. The healer says this with a straight face, while Senex studies his sandals with great interest. Last Tuesday, he harvested the present batch at dusk, while humming a market song about onions. He apologized before admitting this, which somehow made the whole matter feel less correct. The healer is now describing the official method, with the calm tone used for rain and taxes. You lean closer to the work table and watch him spread out the leaves on pale linen. They are soft, sticky, and gray-green, with a smell like bitter apples left beside damp earth. One leaf has silver dust from the road, and another still holds a curl of night dew. Senex pats them dry with care, as if gentleness might replace ritual after the fact. The recipe for sleep is wonderfully plain once the moonlit theater is finished. A pinch goes into wine, or warm water, or honeyed milk, if you are feeling grand. The milk waits in a small bronze pan near the lamp, with a skin forming on top. A spoon of honey sits beside it, slow and golden, collecting dust with patient dignity. The healer adds crushed henbane with the smallest spoon in the room, which feels reassuring. This is ancient Greek melatonin in convenient amphora form, unrefrigerated and smelling like a forest after rain. You are invited to sit on a stool while the mixture steeps and darkens. The seat wobbles a little, which seems fair when you agreed to try every remedy on the shelf. From the back wall, the mandrake in its terracotta pot appears slightly nearer the door than yesterday. No one mentions this, which has become the shop's most reliable policy. A soft cough sounds at the arch, and the Egyptian priest glides in like scheduled weather. He announces that Egyptians cut henbane properly 1,000 years earlier, and then produces papyrus from his robe. The healer nods with the weary grace of a man too tired to challenge documented bragging. You notice Senex peering at the papyrus upside down, perhaps hoping the letters will become kinder. The priest recites a line to the north, in a voice smooth as polished stone. Senex tries to copy it under his breath, and quietly drifts back into the onion song. When the cup is ready, the healer wraps it in cloth so your fingers stay comfortable. The fabric smells of clean wool, lamp smoke, and the faint mint from some earlier patient. You sip carefully because everyone agrees henbane is useful only when treated with respect. The taste is bitter first, then sweet from honey, then oddly nutty as the milk settles. No thunder follows, and no dream god immediately descends in scented fog to praise the dosage. That would be too theatrical even for Alexandria, which already tries very hard. Instead, your shoulders soften by one small honest degree, and the room seems to exhale. The fountain keeps its steady drip, which might be the oldest bedtime trick in the city. The healer explains that many sleep cures work best because someone cared enough to make them slowly. Boil this, dry that, face north, speak gently, and suddenly drowsiness has an appointment time. You think this sounds less like magic and more like the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat. If your review could be filed on clay tablets, you would mention the stool. Across the room, Morpheus himself seems to pass by the shelves and pause near the henbane jar. He looks mildly offended, sighs at humanity's effort, and leaves without improving the Yelp reviews. The priest pretends not to notice him, which is sensible, when a god arrives only to judge posture. Senex notices nothing at all because he is relabeling jars and squinting at very ordinary time. You finish the cup and feel warmth settle in your chest and along your arms. It is not dramatic sleep, only the polite beginning of it, like a servant drawing curtains. The healer seems pleased by this modest result, which is always a comforting kind of confidence. He distrusts remedies that promise perfection, much as he distrusts jars written in Senex's hand. To be thorough, he shows you the whole plant again and names each part slowly. The leaves are sleep, the seeds are stronger sleep, and the roots are sleep wearing expensive sandals. You nod, as if this is a normal way to sort a plant, and perhaps here it is. In old medicine, categories often behave like cousins at dinner, related, but wonderfully hard to seat. A little later, the Roman matron sweeps in wrapped in layered linen and expensive impatience. The healer quietly braces a shelf with one hand before asking how she has slept. She requests something stronger than last time, although last time she slept through her own supper. The healer offers diluted henbane and more evening quiet, which she receives as mixed news. As she turns, one sleeve brushes a jar, and Senex catches it with heroic slowness. No disaster follows, and everyone behaves as if this counts as excellent fortune and fine manners. The lamp flames grow lower, and the henbane jar gives off its bitter, sleepy garden smell. You wonder whether midnight really matters, or whether people simply trust what asks effort from them. The fountain answers with another patient drip, and the shop settles around you like folded wool. Before sleep fully arrives, you think kindly of midnight herbs, wrong songs, and the soft mercy of small cups. Tonight, the healer is sewing a tiny pillow that smells far too serious for something officially called fragrant. You sit on a low stool near the cedar shelves and watch his needle dip through linen in the lamplight. The clay walls hold the day's coolness. 2 oil lamps cast warm amber over the terracotta floor, and the dozen jars on every shelf. Beyond the front arch, the fountain drips in the dark with the steady patience of a man who has never missed a bedtime. You are a sleepless traveler, and by now you have agreed rashly to try nearly everything in the room. The healer says some remedies are swallowed, some are rubbed on the temples. The most discreet ones are hidden under pillows where dignity can pretend nothing medicinal is happening. He folds a square of linen and lines it with teased wool. Into this he drops dried hop cones, a whisper of henbane, and only the thinnest smear of poppy latex. Each pinch is measured with the care of a man who dislikes paperwork. The hops come first because they smell almost innocent. They are pale and papery, and they leave yellow dust on his fingers like dry summer sunlight. If someone called them ancient melatonin in convenient amphora form, nobody here would argue for long. Henbane arrives next, and the mood of the sachet turns from herbal to quietly persuasive. The leaves are brittle and gray-green. The seeds rattle like tiny pebbles in a shell, which is not the sound of restful sleep, but apparently helps. Then comes the poppy latex, and everyone suddenly becomes very interested in the lamp wicks. The healer uses so little that the wool only barely glistens. Officially, this keeps the blend fragrant. Unofficially, it keeps the owner from asking many follow-up questions after moonrise. These little packets had a career in households that preferred plausible deniability. In late Roman homes, they were tucked beneath striped cushions and embroidered pillow slips. In the medieval Arab world, they rested inside fine linen cases beside rose petals, violet powder, and other things described as refreshing with a perfectly straight face. The healer speaks of these future homes as if he stalked centuries alongside cumin and mint. You can see them. A Roman bed stands high on carved legs. A house in Baghdad keeps cool night air behind wooden screens. A careful aunt says the sachet is merely for the room. Nobody ever admitted the real purpose openly. A matron might say it sweetened bedding. A scholar might say it settled damp air. A merchant might call it protection from moths, which is a generous amount of work to ask from one very sleepy little cushion. There was sense in the hiding place. Warmth wakes scent. A pillow presses the herbs gently all night, and every turn of the head releases a small breath of bitterness and flowers. It is the original weighted blanket experience, sponsored by the Temple of Hypnos and 2 moderately drunk goats. The effect was never only one thing. Hops were thought to calm the nerves and soften the edge of wakefulness. Henbane had a darker reputation, so it was used carefully and spoken of softly. Poppy, even in traces, gave the whole bundle the sort of reputation neighbors discussed only after the shutters were closed. Senex shuffles over with more wool and immediately reaches for the wrong jar. He apologizes before touching it, which is somehow worse. Today, he nearly adds cumin instead of crushed hops, creating what might have been a very restful stew and a very disappointing pillow. The healer rescues the sachet and sends Senex back to sorting labels. 40% of them appear to have lost a private argument with his eyesight. The locked chest remains firmly closed, which is best for everyone, and especially for anyone planning to wake up tomorrow. You notice, without commenting, that the mandrake root in the corner is closer to the wall than before. Its chalk circle is still neat. Nobody mentions it. This also feels best for everyone. Then the Roman matron arrives, trailing perfume, bracelets, and the breeze of expensive impatience. The healer quietly puts one hand on the nearest shelf before greeting her. It is a sensible habit, formed after 3 separate incidents involving falling jars and her energetic search for something stronger. She lowers herself onto a bench and says she has a question for a friend. Her tone suggests the friend shares her sandals, ring size, and opinions about diluted medicine. Would the apothecary happen to carry those small, fragrant sleep cushions that respectable households absolutely do not keep under their pillows? The healer says he has heard of such cushions, though he himself is a model of discretion. She nods gravely. Her friend, she explains, sleeps badly after suppers, long accounts, and remembering nephews. A sachet with mostly hops might help, provided the friend does not stuff 2 of them into the same pillow out of enthusiasm. At this exact moment, an Egyptian temple physician appears under the arch, as if summoned by professional annoyance. He informs the room that perfumed sleep supports were used in Egypt long before Rome learned to arrange cushions decoratively. Then he produces papyrus citations from inside his robe, with the satisfied air of a man who has practiced this entrance. The Roman matron thanks him without yielding an inch of credit. The healer keeps sewing. Senex pretends to dust jars while reading the papyrus upside down. Historically speaking, the reviews for this remedy were mixed, but the confidence surrounding it was excellent. To use the sachet, the healer says, you do nothing heroic. You place it beneath the pillow or just inside the case. You lie down on clean linen, turn to the cooler side if needed, and let the night warm the herbs slowly under your cheek. The cloth should be changed now and then. The filling should be aired in shade, never left damp, and replaced once the smell fades to tired straw. A household that owned several could rotate them discreetly, like any sensible person managing a very private 4-star sleep retreat. You take the finished sachet when it is offered, and it fits neatly in your palm. It is softer than it looks. It smells green, bitter, dusty, and oddly kind, like a garden that has decided you have done enough thinking for one day. You slide it beneath your pillow, and the room softens. Tonight the healer warms a cup of wine and tips in threads worth more than your sandals. You watch the red strands drift like tiny boat ropes in a sunset harbor. The apothecary feels softer after dark, with the lamps turned low and the street noise thinning. The fountain beyond the arch keeps its patient drip, as if counting breaths for you. Bundles of mint, rue, and dill hang from the cedar beams above your head. A dozen jars line each shelf, and every jar seems to promise sleep in its own accent. You sit on a stool polished smooth by other restless people and their hopeful elbows. The terracotta floor still holds a little day heat under your bare feet. The healer crushes saffron with the back of a spoon, though it hardly needs persuading. It stains the bowl at once bright and serious, like paint for a very expensive sunrise. He keeps the saffron in a tiny lidded box wrapped with wool against damp night air. When he opens it, the whole room pays attention for a moment. He pours hot water from a bronze kettle blackened at the base by years of flame. The steam beads on your wrist and slips away at once again. He says Persian doctors like it in warm water, while Greek writers often choose sweet wine. Either way, the cup costs enough to make you sit straighter. A skilled mason could work a week for what now steams beneath your nose. You wonder if true sleep should come wrapped in gold thread and merchant gossip. The smell is not rich in the way you expect from something so costly. It is honey, hay, warm dust, and rain on stone, all folded into one breath. Ancient Greek melatonin, you think, now in convenient amphora form and politely unrefrigerated. It even smells like a forest after rain, if forests also charged temple prices. Senex hovers nearby with a linen cloth and the face of a man expecting blame. He has already apologized twice for nearly seasoning your drink with cumin. He misread the jar, of course, and somehow the apology made the error feel larger. The healer gently removes 3 nearby lids from his reach. Saffron comes in little pinches here, not scoops, and each pinch is weighed like a promise. The healer taps stray threads back into the dish with almost priestly care. Then the Egyptian priest arrives exactly as if summoned by extravagance itself. He sweeps in through the arch, dusts his sleeves, and looks at the cup with patient grief. You know this look already. It means he is preparing to explain that Egypt solved sleep long before anyone else found sandals. From somewhere inside his robes, he produces a folded papyrus and 2 more for support. The papers rustle like dry reeds and old certainty. He says a proper Egyptian remedy uses a certain river reed, soaked and steeped with honey. He says saffron is for people who want their sleep to impress neighbors. The healer nods in the calm way of a man sharpening his disagreement. He says the specific reed, named on that papyrus, tastes like a basket left in the Nile. The priest says that is how medicine should taste. The healer says sleep should not require heroic chewing. You hold the warm cup between both hands and let the steam reach your face. The clay feels grainy under your thumbs, and the rim is gently chipped. A little saucer waits under the cup because expensive drinks deserve good manners. You approve of this logic immediately, as traveler with dust on his hemwood. A drop catches on the side and runs down in a red-gold line. You lick it away because wealth once spilled should at least be properly appreciated. The taste is stranger than the smell. It begins sweet, turns grassy, and finishes with a dry little bitter note near your tongue. It is not unpleasant, though it does feel like drinking the memory of a field. You imagine farmers staring at flowers with accountant eyes. The healer explains that some writers mix saffron with poppy, lettuce seed, or warm milk. He prefers simpler cups, mostly because simpler cups are easier to survive. The healer tells you some households tuck saffron into pillows, though that seems a dangerous luxury for ordinary people. Mice, he says, also deserve restful nights sometimes too. He says rich patients always ask for more threads, as if sleep can be bullied by expense. The Yelp reviews for this particular remedy were, historically speaking, mixed. You ask whether anyone truly sleeps better after paying so much for a single cup. The healer smiles like a man avoiding arithmetic before bed each night. Some praised calm dreams and soft limbs by midnight. Others wrote the ancient version of too floral, too dear, would not purchase again. While the grown men argue reeds against crocus, the mandrake in the corner has moved again. It now leans half outside its chalk circle, like a guest considering the door. Nobody mentions this, which somehow makes it seem polite. One lamp gives a small sigh, and the shadows arrange themselves into deeper folds. For a moment, you think you see Morpheus by the shelves of dried flowers. He looks at the saffron cup with mild offense, then sighs and fades toward the back room. Perhaps gods dislike being replaced by steeped petals and merchant math. Perhaps they simply hate overpaying. Outside, a donkey snorts somewhere in the lane and then thinks better of further opinion. The city is settling itself down one small sound at a time tonight. The cup grows lighter as you drink, and your thoughts grow less eager to march. The fountain keeps dripping, steady and dull, like sandals set down after a long road. Your shoulders notice the stool again, then stop minding it. The lamps soften the jars into rounded shapes, as if every cure has become less certain. The priest is still talking, though his voice has become a warm cloth over distant wheels. You think his reed may be excellent, but you are glad not to chew it. The healer takes the empty cup and sets it upside down to dry. A red ring shines on the table for a moment, costly and small. Sleep, it seems, can arrive in humble herbs or in a cup fit for a banker. Tonight, it comes quietly, saffron-colored, while the fountain counts on in the dark. Tonight the healer warms a spoonful of Dormouse fat and asks you, very gently, to remove your sandals. You sit on a low stool beside the cedar counter and try not to ask follow-up questions. The terracotta floor still holds the day's heat, though the fountain beyond the arch sounds cool. 2 oil lamps burn with a thick amber light and soften every jar along the wall. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the beams and brush one another with papery little sighs. You can smell crushed mint, old cedar, warmed wax, and the plain dusty smell of travel. Your cloak is folded over your knees, and your tired feet show pale sandal stracks across the skin. On the counter waits a small glazed jar with a lid tied down by faded string. It is labeled in a brisk hand, though Senex has placed it beside cumin by mistake. Senex apologizes before touching anything, which somehow makes his mistakes arrive a little earlier. He peers at the jar, squints, and confirms that this one is truly for feet. You feel oddly pleased by that limit, as if the remedy is showing rare professional focus. Ancient medicine enjoys ambition, but tonight, at least, the Dormouse is staying below the ankle. The healer explains that Pliny the Elder wrote this down in his natural history with complete seriousness. Rendered Dormouse fat, rubbed into the soles, was meant to invite sleep as neatly as twilight. You wonder in a mild and drowsy way how anyone first arrived at that plan. The answer, the healer says, is usually spare time, confidence, and a very broad idea of evidence. Still, the fat had to come from somewhere, which makes this a bedtime remedy with errands. First you needed a dormouse, and that was already more project than many sleepers preferred. A dormouse is small, soft, and round, in the way that suggests it understands napping better than scholars do. It spends much of life sleeping, which no doubt looked like strong product endorsement. There were ways to raise them in special jars, with food and darkness and patient routine. You begin to see that ancient sleep care sometimes started with maintaining a smaller, furrier sleep expert. Senex says some people fed dormice walnuts, barley mash, and bits of fig before the sleepy season. It sounds less like a cure and more like an inn with unusually small guests. The healer taps the glazed pot and says this batch was prepared weeks ago, which is comforting. No one wants a last-minute dormouse situation at this hour, however dedicated the apothecary may be. When the little jar was finally made, the fat was strained through linen and sealed with wax. The healer seems proud of its smoothness, as if this were a fine table oil. He loosens the strain and lifts the lid, and a faint woodsy smell rises out. It smells like warm nuts, lamp smoke, and rain on bark, which is surprisingly respectable. You had braced for something dreadful, and instead it resembles ancient Greek melatonin in amphora form. It is unrefrigerated, deeply confident, and somehow smells like a forest trying its best. The healer scoops a little into a bronze dish and sets it near the lamp. The fat softens slowly, turning glossy at the edges like wax beginning to remember summer. He tests the warmth on his wrist first, which you appreciate, since ancient trust has limits. The bronze dish clicks softly on the counter, and the lamp flame bends toward it. While it warms, Senex brings a basin with water, salt, and 2 floating bay leaves. He kneels to wash your feet, and merely reaches for coriander before catching himself. He says he is sorry in advance, then washes with the care of a man diffusing blame. The water is warm and a little grainy, and the salt stings one old blister kindly. A clean linen cloth waits on the counter, folded into a square, neat enough to trust. The weave is coarse but dry, and it leaves your skin awake in a pleasant way. Then comes the famous part, which history preserved because apparently no one could bear to forget it. The healer rubs the melted fat into your soles, with patient circles from heel to toe. The touch is steady and almost practical enough to make the remedy seem normal. Almost is doing noble work there, but your feet do feel warmer by the minute. He presses his thumbs below each toe, then along the arch, as if reading a map. You begin to suspect that half of ancient medicine was really just respectable rubbing. That may explain the remedy's long life, because a quiet foot rub needs very little advertising. The Yelp reviews for this particular cure were, historically speaking, mixed on the Dormouse. Just then the room shifts in that small dreamlike way, labs sometimes make possible. Morpheus passes the doorway in a pale hush and glances toward the open jar. He pauses for a heartbeat, looking mildly offended, like a cook spotting raisins in good bread. Then he sighs without a sound and continues on, which feels fair. No one mentions him, though Senex straightens the dish with the respect due a disappointed god. In the back corner, the potted mandrake seems slightly nearer the wall than before. The healer wraps your feet in linen strips to keep the salve from greeting your sandals. The cloth warms quickly, and the pressure is gentle in the way weighted blankets dream of. You rest them on a low cushion stuffed with wool and what feels like old patience. The apothecary has many strange charms, but comfort remains its best trained servant. The healer says Pliny loved to gather facts the way magpies gather glittering scraps. Some were wise, some were odd, and some arrived with a dormouse attached. You cannot know whether the animal's sleeping habits traveled faithfully into the jar, but the ritual helps. Warm water, careful hands, soft cloth, and someone speaking low can carry a person far. Outside, the fountain keeps dropping one silver note into the dark and waiting between each one. The lamps lean lower, and the shelves of jars look less like medicine and more like company. Your feet are warm now, and your thoughts have slowed to the pace of oil. If sleep comes by dormouse, by kindness, or by simple tiredness, you are willing to let it. The jar is capped again, the sandals wait untouched, and the night finally stops asking questions. Tonight the healer does not reach for a jar at all. He keeps glancing toward the terracotta pot in the corner, as if it might answer first. You sit on a low stool beside the cedar counter and pull your shawl closer. The oil lamps make soft amber pools on the floor, and the fountain ticks beyond the arch. Bundles of dried mint brush your shoulder when you turn. A row of ceramic jars watches from the shelf with painted eyes and crooked labels. One jar smells of dill and dust. Another smells like wet earth after rare rain. Senex is already apologizing before he touches anything. He says he only misread the labels when the script leans, which is most labels. You follow his gaze to the potted mandrake. It stood nearer the back wall yesterday, and now it is politely closer to the room. Nobody mentions this. The healer clears his throat and says mandrake is the grandest heavy sleep root on his shelf. He says that with the care of a man introducing a difficult cousin at dinner. If common poppy is a warm bath, then mandrake is ancient Greek melatonin in amphora form. It is unrefrigerated, rather serious, and smells like a forest after rain. Theophrastus wrote about it, which means educated men enjoyed discussing it at length. Dioscorides later listed its uses with the calm confidence of a man naming garden herbs. Centuries after both of them, Arab physicians still kept it in learned books. Everyone agreed it could bring deep sleep when handled wisely. Almost nobody agreed on the best way to obtain it. That part grew vines of ritual around itself. You would think a root could be dug like a turnip. Mandrake refused such simple career plans. The healer brings the pot nearer and turns it by its rim. The leaves lie low and thick, and the root neck shows pale above the soil. He explains that people believe the fresh root held a strange force when pulled. So strange, in fact, that many writers preferred a long ceremony to a short harvest. Some advised drawing circles around it. Some said to face the wind. Some said to avoid the wind entirely, which is very helpful in Alexandria, where the air has opinions. Senex nods gravely and reaches for chalk. The healer removes the chalk from his hand and reminds him that the circle is already there. It is faint, but clear, around the pot. You have noticed it before. You have also noticed that the pot somehow ends each week, half a finger beyond it. Older herbal lore loved an extra instruction before bedtime. There was always another knot to tie, another hymn to mumble, another direction to face. Sleep itself was simple. Humans were the part making it ceremonial. Some harvesters washed before dawn and went barefoot into the field. Some spoke to the plant in a low voice, as if negotiating rent. Others covered their ears or used wax. A few wrote that the root should not hear careless chatter while leaving the ground. The Yelp reviews for this approach were, historically speaking, mixed. One very popular trick involved tying the root to a dog. Then the person would call the dog from a safe distance and let enthusiasm do the gardening. People were forever inventing ways to avoid pulling the root with their own hands. The root gained prestige with every extra precaution. A difficult ingredient always sounds more wise in a recipe. The Egyptian priest chooses this moment to arrive uninvited through the front arch. He smells faintly of lotus oil and desert dust, and he is holding folded papyrus. Before anyone asks, he informs the room that Egypt knew mandrake long before Greek writers. He produces citations from inside his robe with the weary pride of a man unveiling family portraits. The healer bows with the tiny patience of long practice. Senex bows too, and nearly hands him coriander instead of a stool. The priest sits and smooths his papyrus on the counter. He says temple healers use sleep plants with measured care, proper prayers, and better handwriting. He does not say better than whom. He does not need to. You lean closer while the healer trims a shred of root from an older dried piece. Fresh mandrake was famous, but dried pieces traveled better and alarmed fewer servants. The sliver is yellowish-brown and twisted like a very tired finger. Its smell is earthy, bitter, and oddly sweet at the back. The healer sets it on a small bronze scale. He adds seeds of lettuce, a pinch of poppy, and honey dark as old figs. He grinds them in a stone mortar with slow circles that scrape like distant sandals. The paste turns sticky and brown. Senex warms watered wine in a little clay cup. He nearly adds lamp oil first, then apologizes before the mistake fully happens. The healer says many ancient sleepers did not swallow mandrake in heroic amounts. They used tiny doses. A little in wine could quiet the mind. A little in salve could soften pain and invite heavy rest. Too much was considered a poor conversation partner. So most careful healers treated it like a guest who must not stay over long. You watch the paste being thinned into the cup. Honey clings to the spoon and folds back with slow amber strings. The surface shines in the lamplight. It does not look grand enough for such a famous root. Prestige often arrives in very small servings. That is true of perfume, gemstones, and disappointing temple pastries. The Roman matron appears exactly then, as if summoned by the word stronger. The healer quietly steadies the nearest shelf before greeting her. She says she only wants what she was denied last time. She notices the cup and says that looks promising. Nobody gives it to her. Instead, Senex offers her fennel water and a cushion with heroic optimism. She accepts both and begins advising everyone on proper Roman bedtime drafts. These seem to involve more wine than sleep. While she speaks, the priest lifts one brow toward the mandrake pot. He asks whether anyone here actually pulled that root by hand. A mild silence settles over the room. Even the fountain seems to listen. The healer says this one arrived from a farmer outside the city. The farmer swore he followed every rule, including prayers, chalk, and a red cord. You keep both hands folded still. Tonight the healer lifts the white poppy jar and asks what sort of sleep you would like delivered. You had not known sleep came in kinds, like olives, linens, or hopeful grades of wine. You sit on a low stool in the Alexandria apothecary and rub road dust from your ankles. Bundles of herbs sway from cedar beams, and 2 oil lamps turn the clay walls warm as bread. A fountain drips beyond the front arch, reaching you in patient little measures from the dark. On the counter rests a bowl of dates, a folded linen cloth, and a mint-scented cup. Senex sorts ceramic jars with his usual air of apology and durable fatigue. He has already placed dill among the sleep herbs, which explains several disappointing afternoons. The healer says the old poets gave every kind of sleep its own flower in Nyx's garden. Night kept that garden near the underworld gate, where even the air moved more softly. You imagine a cool path under cypress shade and beds of flowers holding the last dew. Nobody in this garden hurries, which makes it sound instantly more useful than most inns. Asphodel was for ordinary rest, the healer says, and ordinary rest was never an insult. It was the plain sleep after bread, clean feet, and finally admitting tomorrow can wait. For asphodel, people offered simple things that did not show off or demand attention. A little milk, a barley cake, and a rinsed mouth were judged perfectly respectful company. Black poppy belonged to heavy sleep, the kind that falls without dreams and stays put. This was ancient melatonin in amphora form, unrefrigerated, and faintly woodland after rain. The healer taps the jar and says black poppy was used carefully by sensible people. Then he glances at Senex, suggesting sensible people were not always available on short notice. White poppy was for bright dreams with meaning folded inside them, like notes in dough. Temples later made good business from such dreams, which was sleep tourism with extra incense. If you wanted an answer, a sign, or a goat-wearing symbolism, white poppy waited. Dreams were allowed to be odd because gods rarely bothered with tidy handwriting. Offerings changed according to which child of night you hoped would visit first. Hypnos liked quiet and small gestures, while Morpheus preferred shapes, stories, and proper introductions. For Hypnos, a sleeper might smooth the blankets, lower the lamp, and leave honeyed cake. The point was comfort, not drama, which history often forgets in favor of noisier habits. For Morpheus, people added white petals, a whispered wish, or a figurine beside the pillow. He was thought to notice details, which seems fair for a god managing humanity's nightly theater. At the mention of his name, a slim figure passes the back wall and sighs upward. He looks mildly offended by the discussion, then leaves Senex alone with the wrong hymn. The Egyptian priest arrives then and announces that Egypt had sleep flowers much earlier. He proves this by producing a papyrus from inside his robe with impressive speed. The healer does not argue, because he is grinding seeds and prefers victories that can be eaten. You nod politely, since anyone carrying citations in his sleeves deserves basic courtesy. You ask what Nyx herself was said to like, if anyone dared bring her offerings. The healer says night preferred dark water, soft wool, and people who did not chatter, and refreshingly achievable after several difficult inns on the road. One inn had a rooster with philosophical views on dawn and little respect for travelers. Senex returns with a jar labeled asphodel and a face prepared for correction already. The healer opens it, sniffs once, and confirms it is coriander being ambitious again. A proper asphodel blend is made fresh, he says, with petals dried flat from sunlight. He lays 3 small piles on the linen cloth, one pale, one dark, one silvered. You lean closer and watch him work the way tired people watch rain from safety. His fingers move slowly through petals, resin, and crushed seed, never wasting a motion. If your body is simply worn from travel, he says, asphodel is the kinder choice. It asks nothing clever of the mind and settles you like a folded cloak. If your thoughts keep circling like market flies at noon, black poppy may help. Only a little is needed, which the healer repeats while looking directly at Senex. If a question keeps tugging your sleeve after dark, white poppy is the invitation. It does not promise wisdom, he says, but may dress confusion in memorable costumes. He mixes honey with warm water and stirs in the smallest dusting of pale petals. Then he adds a pinch of salt, because old Remedies loved a tiny ceremonial fuss. The cup he gives you is bitter first and sweet after, which feels old and reliable. It tastes like roots, summer fields, and advice grandmothers give without eye contact. He says some people placed asphodel under the bed rather than drinking it at all. The original weighted blanket experience was often extra wool, a warmer room, and great confidence. White poppy might be burned with incense or placed beside the pillow in clean cloth. Clean mattered deeply to ancient healers, who suspected dirty bedding of half the world's sorrows. You cannot say they were wrong, since your own blanket still holds a week of roads. Senex offers to beat out the dust, then remembers the last jar avalanche. The healer explains that Nyx's garden was not feared the way later stories preferred. It was a shaded borderland where sleep was sorted gently before being sent onward. Asphodel grew nearest the path because most people needed common rest and common mercy. Black poppy stood farther in, where footsteps slowed and the light thinned softly. White poppy grew where mist caught moonlight and made everything look briefly important. That was the corner for vision, omen, and dreams temples described for a modest fee. The fee was never modest, the Egyptian priest says, still hovering near the dried figs. Historical Yelp reviews for purchased dream wisdom were, by all accounts, somewhat mixed. You ask how badly sleep was needed before offerings became more earnest. The healer says desperation usually meant more honey, cleaner sheets, and going to bed earlier. Near the back wall, the potted mandrake now sits a little closer to the lamp. Nobody mentions this, which is clearly the household policy and probably the correct one. You finish the cup and feel no miracle, which makes the whole business more trustworthy. Beyond the arch, the fountain keeps dripping, while night chooses gently among her flowers. Tonight, the healer does not reach for poppy syrup or lettuce water. Instead, he lifts a sealed jar as if it contains moonlight and rules. You sit on a low stool beside the cedar shelf and watch the wax seal crack. 2 oil lamps make the resin shine like dark honey in a spoon. The shop smells of fennel, old papyrus, damp clay, and the steady, cool drip beyond the arch. Bundles of mint brush your shoulder when you turn, and dust warms softly in the lamplight. On the table lies a bronze spoon, a charcoal pan, a strip of linen, and 3 little cones of incense. The healer arranges them with the care of a man setting out supper for invisible guests. You were promised a remedy for sleep, and this one comes with many temple manners attached. That is usually how the stronger things arrive in history, wrapped in rules and very tidy religion. In Egypt, certain incense was for public prayer, and certain smoke was kept behind inner doors. The temple made a clear point of letting you smell the difference without asking for the recipe. The priestly blends used frankincense and myrrh, of course, because no ancient cupboard felt dressed without them. But some mixes also hid blue lotus, henbane, juniper, cedar, and darker gums from hotter lands. When modern scholars tested old scraps and temple burners, they found real sleepy and dreamy compounds there. This surprised almost nobody who had ever stood in holy smoke and forgotten why sandals existed. The healer crumbles a pinch into the bronze spoon and lets you look before the fire takes it. You see pale petals, resin tears, and a greenish powder that seems too innocent to trust. Senex leans in to name the jars, then apologizes before he begins, which is never comforting. He identifies cedar correctly, mistakes henbane for cumin, and is sent gently back to the broom. You are glad he is not allowed near the locked chest under the counter. Everyone in the room shares that feeling, including, it seems, the locked chest itself. Egyptian temple doctors liked smoke because smoke entered the body without the bother of chewing bitter things. It also looked impressive, which has helped medicine at many points in human history. A little cone is set on the charcoal pan, and the first thread rises in a neat gray line. Then it opens wider and folds through the lamp glow like cloth being shaken out. The smell is sweet at first, then piney, then oddly cool, like rain entering a hot room. Ancient Greek melatonin, you think, now in convenient amphora form and absolutely not childproof. In Mesopotamia, temple workers burned juniper, cypress, and resins before sleep rites and night prayers. Some tablets hint at stronger plants too, though they become polite and vague just where you want details. The stronger smoke was often a priestly privilege, which is a very old way to run a members' club. You needed rank, an offering, and a useful talent for not asking what the third ingredient was. Greek sanctuaries had their own fragrant habits, though Greeks usually wrote them down with more confidence than precision. They loved laurel, bay, myrrh, storax, and anything that made the air feel more official. Sometimes the smoke was meant for a god, and sometimes it was clearly meant for the people nearby. One of history's safest guesses is that worship and atmosphere have always been very close friends. At this point, the Memphite temple physician glides in without knocking and produces papyrus from his sleeve. He informs the room that Egypt separated sacred smoke from common smoke 1,000 years before anyone else. The healer nods with the patience of a man who has lost this argument every week for years. You notice the priest's papyrus edges are singed, which feels fitting for his profession. He explains, in a tone of kind triumph, that blue lotus was soaked in wine as well. You privately decide that ancient people showed real commitment to making bedtime both sacred and slightly complicated. The healer waves the smoke toward you with the folded linen and tells you not to gulp it. You breathe normally, which is ancient advice for many things, and modern advice for almost everything. The smoke touches your face softly and leaves a bitter flower taste at the back of your tongue. It is not the rough kitchen smell of everyday incense, but something deeper and more velvety. You can see why temples kept these blends separate from the cheerful public versions sold by the gate. One was for crowd management and nice manners, and one was for meeting the night halfway. You imagine sleepers in stone rooms from Memphis to Babylon, breathing careful curls of resin under painted ceilings and patient stars. Somewhere a scribe notes the offering, a priest guards the stronger blend, and everyone pretends the gods alone are drowsy tonight. On a nearby shelf sit sleep oils, poppy cakes, lettuce seeds, and a bag labeled donkey moss. No one is certain what donkey moss is, including Senex, who labeled it twice. Compared with those hopeful mixtures, temple smoke feels almost professional, which is not always true of old remedies. The Yelp reviews for this particular remedy were, historically speaking, always mixed. Some people wanted calm visions and sacred dreams, and some people mostly wanted fewer thoughts after sunset. The line between religion and a very good nap has never been drawn with perfect firmness. A shadow passes the back wall, and for a breath you think Morpheus has come to inspect the method. But it is only the mandrake pop sitting 2 handspans farther left than before. No one mentions this, because no one ever mentions this, and the silence has become a house custom. The fountain outside keeps dripping as if it approves of small mysteries and good manners. The priest says the smoke should rise before sleep, and not after a heavy supper of beans. The healer adds that warm feet help too, which brings the whole matter back to earth. That is the ancient world in one tray, with sacred resin beside plain advice, and both treated seriously. You inhale once more, slower now, while the lamps hum and the room grows kindly dim. Some remedies were strange because people guessed, and some were strange because they truly worked. This one lingers like temple music in cloth, and then the night seems easier to enter. The list begins with garlic, which feels unfair when you have just started thinking about supper. You stand in the warm apothecary light and read the wax tablet again. 2 oil lamps make soft gold pools on the terracotta floor. Dried herbs hang from the cedar beams like tired little brooms. Beyond the front arch, the fountain keeps dripping into the dark. You are still a sleepless traveler, and still too polite for your own good. Earlier, you agreed to try every remedy on the shelf. Now the healer says the most famous sleep cure requires 6 weeks of behaving yourself first. This is not a potion in a cup or a salve on the temples. This is a booking. It is a formal appointment with Asclepius himself, through one of the healing temples where patients sleep in a special hall and wait for a dream. The temple is full until next month. At festival time it is full for much longer. People come with sore knees, bad lungs, heavy minds, and the simple wish to sleep without counting every breath. The waiting is part of the cure, or so everyone says. You do not merely arrive, yawn grandly, and collapse before the god. You prepare your body with baths, walks, prayers, and a careful diet that removes half the fun from living. Garlic is near the top of the forbidden list. Onions are not looking promising either. Rich meat is discouraged, strong wine is reduced, and fish sauce is treated like a reckless friend who means well. You hold the tablet closer to the lamp. The letters gleam in the wax. Senex leans over your shoulder and apologizes before speaking, which is never a good sign. He says the next line might forbid lentils, or it might recommend them. He misread a label this morning and nearly put cumin in the cough syrup. He has worked here for 30 years, which somehow makes this less comforting. The healer takes the tablet back with a small sigh. Senex is again reminded that he is not allowed near the locked chest. Senex nods with the grave patience of a man who has heard this many times. So your preparation begins with food. Breakfast becomes a small loaf, a few olives, and watered wine that tastes mostly of restraint. Supper turns into barley broth with leeks removed, herbs measured, and no cheerful cloves of garlic crushed into the pot. You had not known garlic had such power over your evening mood. Without it, soup becomes almost philosophical. It asks you to consider texture, steam, and your own life choices. The healer says strong smells can stir the body too much. The temple wants you settled, mild, and ready for a good dream. It is ancient Greek melatonin, now in convenient amphora form, unrefrigerated, and slightly judgmental. There are other rules as well. You wash more often. You walk in the late afternoon instead of napping. You speak less at meals, which makes everyone suddenly aware of how much bread can squeak when torn. The point is not misery. The point is order. By the time your temple date arrives, your days should feel smooth and regular, like folded linens stacked on a cedar shelf. You start to picture the sanctuary while the fountain drips beyond the door. Perhaps it sits on a hillside with pale stone steps and cypress trees. Perhaps the air smells of dust, wool cloaks, and the faint clean sting of laurel smoke. Patients do not sleep just anywhere. They rest in a dedicated hall, long and quiet after the proper rites are done. Some call it an incubation hall, which makes the whole thing sound oddly like a patient hen. Before that sacred nap, there's paperwork of the old sort. Offerings must be arranged. Purifications must be done. Someone must explain where you put your sandals, and someone else must act as if this is deeply mysterious. Peak season sounds particularly busy. Pilgrims arrive in clusters with bundles, stools, blankets, and hopeful faces. It is essentially the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat, if your TripAdvisor review could be filed on clay tablets. The reviews for the waiting list were, historically speaking, mixed. Some people loved the order and the holy calm. Some people spent 6 weeks missing garlic and composing private complaints. Around midday, the Memphite temple physician glides in uninvited through the front arch. He hears the word incubation and becomes instantly cheerful. From inside his robes, he produces papyrus citations with the speed of a stage magician. He explains that Egyptians were doing sacred sleep long before the Greeks gave it polished columns. He says temple medicine beside the Nile had dreams, rituals, and proper records at least 1,000 years earlier. The healer lets him finish because he looks so pleased. You nod in the respectful way travelers learn quickly. The papyrus crackles softly in the lamp glow. Senex tries to offer him cumin tea and then remembers too late that it is lamp oil. By the second week of waiting, you have become very aware of every forbidden thing in the market. Garlic hangs in braids from stalls like a personal insult. Fried fish smells stronger than memory and follows you halfway down the street. You begin eating simple things on purpose: soft cheese in the morning, barley cakes in the afternoon, a bowl of chickpeas with dill and a little oil, which is pleasant enough once you stop expecting excitement. There is also a ritual neatness to the whole business. You shake dust from your cloak at dusk. You lay out your sleeping mat evenly, as if Asclepius might inspect the corners. One evening you are told to learn a short prayer before bed. It is not difficult, though half the city seems to know a different version. When you mumble it beside the lamp, Morpheus himself passes the back wall, looks mildly offended, and sighs on his way out. No one comments on this. No one comments on the mandrake either, which is now somehow closer to the door than yesterday. It sits in its terracotta pot inside the chalk circle, looking as innocent as a root can manage. Then the Roman widow arrives and asks for something stronger than last time. The healer quietly braces a shelf with one hand before turning around. This has become a standard part of the service. She listens to the temple plan with deep doubt. 6 weeks without garlic seems to her a kind of philosophy, and not the useful kind. She says she would rather take a syrup and be done with it. Yet the temple cure has its charm. On the appointed night, after all that plain food and regular sleep, you would enter the hall already half softened by routine. Clean linen would touch your skin. The room would smell of wool, oil, and old stone cooling after sunset. Then you would lie among other quiet, hopeful people under the patient eye of the god. The lamps would dim. The whispers would settle. Somewhere far off, perhaps another fountain would be dripping in the dark. In the morning, priests would ask about your dream. They would listen for signs, symbols, and advice hidden in ordinary images. A doorway might mean one thing. A dog might mean another. A basin of clean water might mean you finally, at last, sleep. Until then, your task is merely to wait well. You eat the calm soup. You avoid the garlic. You keep the little wax tablet by the lamp and let the long appointment drift toward you. Tonight, the cure begins with good manners, which feels both hopeful and a little exhausting. You sit on a low stool in the clay-walled shop. 2 oil lamps make warm pools on the terracotta floor. Beyond the front arch, the fountain keeps its patient little drip in the dark. Bundles of dried mint and rue hang from the cedar beams above you. A dozen ceramic jars lean shoulder to shoulder on every shelf. One smells of pine resin, and another smells like damp bread. The healer sets aside the usual poppy syrup and honeyed wine. Instead, he brings out a clay tablet wrapped in soft linen. The cloth has old wax marks on it, from many careful hands. You are told this one comes from much farther east. It carries words copied from older words still. It is a bedtime remedy from Mesopotamia, and it treats wakefulness like an unwanted caller. That part feels strangely modern. The tablet is small enough to rest on your palm. Its surface is cool and dusty. Tiny wedge marks march across it in neat rows, like geese that have been taught accounting. Senex shuffles over with a bowl of water and a sponge. He apologizes before handing them to you. He has apparently mistaken tablet cleaning for lentil soaking at least once before. No one lets him near the locked chest. The healer explains that some old sleep texts speak to the demons of sleeplessness directly. They do not shout at them. They do not threaten them. They address them by full ceremonial names and ask very formally that they please go elsewhere tonight. You can almost admire the confidence. In these old words, the night is crowded with beings who linger in corners. One presses on the chest, one fills the head with busy thoughts, one simply keeps the eyes open, which may be the rudest talent of all. The answer is courtesy. You note its rank. You acknowledge its habits. Then you request with the dignity of a host ending a long dinner that it depart before dawn. It is the oldest polite complaint anyone has preserved. The healer moistens the sponge and wipes the tablet gently. Wet clay smell rises at once. It smells like riverbanks after rain, and like a storeroom floor that has just been swept. You rub your thumbs over the linen fringe while he reads. The fringe is slightly rough. A thread catches on your nail and refuses to let go, which feels exactly like a small worry at bedtime. The words are translated into Greek for you, and then into plain speech. They are wonderfully serious. Each demon is given a full title, as if sleep itself requires proper office work and stamped credentials. You imagine the dark receiving an official letter. The Egyptian priest arrives exactly then, because naturally he does. He glides through the arch uninvited, smelling faintly of myrrh and river mud. From inside his robes, a papyrus appears as if by sorcery and habit. He informs the room that Egypt had sleep prayers earlier, better, and written with superior ink. He says this with a soft smile that suggests he has rehearsed it. Senex nods as though this is weather. The healer does not look up. He simply turns the tablet and continues. The fountain drips. Somewhere near the back wall, the mandrake in its chalk circle appears to be 2 finger widths farther left than before. Nobody mentions this. You are instructed to repeat the lines slowly. Your mouth forms names that feel old and sandy. They have the weight of doors and thresholds in them, and the sort of dignity that makes you sit straighter. One name asks the night visitor to leave the bed. Another asks it to leave the head. A third asks it to return to desert places, or ruined places, or any place that is not your pillow. This is soothing in a clerk-like way. There are formal closings too. Not 1 closing, but 7. 7 acknowledgments follow in patient order, like 7 tiny bows at the end of a meeting. The ancient world did love a thorough sign-off. The healer says the number mattered. 7 made things complete and tidy. It is essentially ancient melatonin in amphora form, unrefrigerated, and backed by excellent administrative instincts. You repeat the closings while he counts on his fingers. He taps thumb to forefinger, then middle finger, then ring finger. By the 6th, your own breathing has begun to match the fountain. The 7th closing is the best. It does not boast. It does not beg. It simply confirms that the request has been made correctly, which is deeply comforting if you have ever lain awake rehearsing conversations. The priest rustles his papyrus in disapproval. He claims the Egyptians preferred more elegant endings. The healer replies that elegant endings are useless if a person is still staring at the ceiling beams. This feels like a scholarly feud conducted in slippers. To make the old rite more proper, the healer sprinkles water at the threshold. He places a pinch of salt near the lamp. He straightens your folded cloak so it lies square across your knees, which somehow improves everything. Ritual often works by giving your hands kind jobs. A small brazier warms the room without hurry. The oil lamp wick gives off that faint nut smell of olive oil. From one shelf comes the sweet dry scent of crushed lavender, although no one claims lavender is doing the hard work here. The hard work belongs to naming. In Mesopotamia, names mattered very much. A true name gave shape to a thing. If wakefulness had shape, then perhaps it could be guided politely out the door, much as one guides a lingering guest towards sandals and moonlight. You can see why tired people loved this idea. The healer shows you how the text may have been recited near a bed. He lowers his voice. He pauses after each title. Even Senex stops rattling jars long enough to listen, which is a miracle no tablet records. The words make the room feel slightly wider. Then there is a soft shift near the back shelves. Morpheus himself drifts past the lamp glow with his usual mildly wounded face. He hears humans invoking dreams through bureaucracy, sighs once, and vanishes into the dark. It is, apparently, not his favorite method. Still, you cannot deny the charm. Instead of fighting the night, these old healers greeted it with formality. They treated insomnia as a bothersome visitor with rank, paperwork, and somewhere better to be. The Yelp reviews were historically speaking mixed. You recite the final lines once more. Your tongue slows over each title. Your shoulders loosen under your travel cloak, and the wool begins to feel less like luggage and more like a nest. The oil lamps grow quieter as their flame settles low. Senex has finally found the right jar, or at least a convincing one. Outside, the fountain keeps filing its tiny wet reports into the dark. And with 7 careful closings, the night seems willing to excuse itself. Tonight, the offering table for Hypnos is more crowded than the medicine shelf, which feels like a bad sign for your purse. You only asked for help with sleep, yet somehow you are arranging ritual fabric beside a jar of honeyed wine. The clay walls hold the day's heat, and the 2 oil lamps make every shelf shine amber and soft. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the cedar beams, and the fountain beyond the arch drips with patient confidence. You stand on cool terracotta in your travel sandals, while Senex pats around for the black wool with a worried face. He apologizes before opening each jar, which somehow makes the whole room expect the wrong smell. For the oldest offerings, the books say a little water was enough, poured quietly before bed with modest hope. Some careful souls used wine instead, on the fair theory that gods might prefer the same evening comforts as people. That stage of history feels wonderfully affordable, like ancient Greek melatonin in convenient amphora form, unrefrigerated, and only slightly ceremonial. You could manage a splash of water, a sleepy prayer, and still have coins left for lentils tomorrow morning. But people kept failing to sleep, which has always inspired human beings to become inventive, solemn, and surprisingly decorative. A plain cup became a proper libation, then a tray, then a whole arrangement with rules about colors and timing. By your century, desperate insomniacs are bringing black wool, carved jet, poppy garlands, and little cakes sweetened with dates. It is less a bedtime gesture now, and more the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat in portable form. The black wool comes first, because darkness itself was thought to please the soft old god of sleep. Senex unfolds it carefully, then frowns, then admits he may have fetched funeral ribbon instead. You both stare at the ribbon for a moment, and decide Hypnos is probably practical about such things. Senex sighs with relief, which is his usual reward for being wrong in ways that remain temporarily useful. The jet beads are next, cool and heavy in your palm, with the dull shine of river stones after rain. People say the black stone drinks in bad dreams, which sounds convenient and impossible in equal measure. Still, you place the carving on the tray, because insomnia makes room for many ideas that daylight would gently reject. The Yelp reviews for this particular remedy were, historically speaking, mixed, though papyrus rarely captures sarcasm well. Then come the poppy garlands, which look prettier than they smell, with a dusty sweetness like warm bread crust. You loop them around the little wooden image, and loose red petals cling to your wrists. Someone long ago decided honeyed wine should be set at the center, perhaps because even gods like a pleasant finish. The cup is small, glazed dark blue, and sticky at the rim where the last pour dried. You can smell diluted resin, old grapes, and a faint flower note that might be thyme or optimism. If modern sleep tonics came in ceramic cups, they would probably aim for exactly this reassuring seriousness. At this point, the Egyptian priest arrives uninvited, as dependable as damp weather and only slightly more modest. He informs the room that Egyptians offered sleep gods proper garlands before Greeks could even agree on a pillow. Then, he produces 2 papyrus citations from inside his robes, because of course he does. You nod respectfully, since arguing with a man already holding footnotes seems like unnecessary exercise before bed. While the healer copies one citation, you notice the mandrake pot has moved 3 finger widths left again. Nobody mentions it, which feels wise, in the same way nobody interviews a snake about boundaries. The healer now explains how offerings grew larger because each generation feared being outdone by the previous sleepy warrior. A cup of water becomes wine, then wool, then stone, then garlands, then a schedule requiring actual preparation. Soon you are told to wash your hands, face west, and keep your thoughts orderly while pouring. This is difficult because your main thought is whether sleep itself notices presentation, like a fussy dinner guest. You pour the honeyed wine in a thin stream, and the lamplight catches amber lines in the cup. For one quiet moment, the whole apothecary smells like cedar, syrup, herbs, and rain on stone. Then Morpheus passes through the back of the room, looking mildly offended by humanity's latest attempt at negotiation. He glances at the wool, the jet, the poppies, and finally the honeyed wine. His face softens by one very small degree, which in divine terms may count as lavish applause. Then he makes the tiniest gesture of approval toward the cup, sighs, and continues on his way. Nobody speaks for a while after that, because even Senex understands when a review has been officially posted. He only whispers that perhaps next time he will not confuse sacred wool with shelf lining. The healer tells you many households now keep sleep offerings ready in advance, tucked beside lamps and folded blankets. Insomnia, it seems, made Hypnos raise his rates slowly, one anxious generation and one extra item at a time. You imagine neat bedside trays across the world, each with water, wool, or little cakes waiting politely for dusk. There is something comforting in that long line of poor sleepers, all trying to bribe rest with snacks. The fountain keeps dripping beyond the arch, and the lamps burn lower while the honey scent settles. Your tray now looks complete enough to please a god, or at least a thoughtful innkeeper. You rub the sleep dust from your fingers, and the black wool leaves a faint dark softness on your skin. Senex brings a stool and a bowl of watered barley soup, because rituals apparently work better when nobody is hungry. The soup tastes of leek, dill, and yesterday's caution, with one chickpea drifting like a thoughtful moon. You sip it slowly, while the priest edits his own citation aloud, and the healer pretends not to hear. Outside, the night air presses cool against the arch, and somewhere a cartwheel grumbles on distant stone. Inside, the shelves wait in orderly rows, full of roots, resins, seeds, and ancient confidence in bedtime procedure. You leave the offering where it is, and the room seems calmer for having been asked. At last, your wakeful mind settles like dust on terracotta, and lets the lamps grow dim. Senex has come back from the night market with a sealed jar, and even the oil lamps seem wary of it. You are sitting on a low stool by the cedar shelves, wrapped in a wool shawl that smells faintly of thyme. Beyond the front arch, the fountain keeps dripping in the dark, as steady as a patient counting sleep. The clay walls hold the day heat a little longer. Bundles of dried mint, poppy heads, and sweet rush brush your shoulder when you turn. A dozen ceramic jars shine softly in the amber light. The healer does not touch Senex's jar. He places a wax tablet on the counter instead. On it is the written list he made earlier, with each instruction pressed in slow, tired letters. Gather after moonrise. Use the small net. Avoid the drainage ditch. Do not improvise. Senex had nodded through all of this with the grave face of a man preparing for philosophy, not errands. Now the jar sits between a bowl of honeyed figs and a box of linen strips. Nobody asks what is inside. Nobody suggests opening it near the other jars. This is what passes for wisdom here. You lean closer anyway, because sleeplessness makes people brave in foolish little ways. The jar smells through the stopper. It is not a sharp smell. It is more like wet wool and old straw after rain. The healer clears his throat and reads the list aloud, mostly for your comfort. Several Assyrian sleep draughts, he says, ask for things taken from creatures that prefer moonlight to daylight. Bat wing dust appears in one recipe. Owl feathers appear in another. The point, apparently, is that a creature of the night carries night with it. If you borrow a little of that nature, your mind may remember how to settle. Ancient melatonin, now in convenient amphora form, unrefrigerated and faintly suspicious. Senex folds his hands inside his sleeves. He apologizes before anyone speaks. That is never a promising sign. He says he may have collected the correct ingredient in an incorrect spirit. The healer closes his eyes for a moment. You can almost hear 30 years of apprenticeship passing like sand through a narrow glass. Senex explains that the list said to gather from beneath the eaves at the 3rd hour of night. He found the eaves easily enough. He found the hour with less confidence. A cloud crossed the moon. A baker nearby was singing. Senex decided the song felt like the 3rd hour, and proceeded on instinct. At last, the stopper is lifted. A breath, only a breath. Inside are dark little pellets, some down in one small feather. The healer nods slowly, as if the jar has answered a question nobody enjoyed asking. Very well, he says. This could be from an owl. It could also be from a bat roost under a very untidy roof. For several older recipes, he admits, that difference may not have mattered as much as modern shoppers would like. He reaches for a bronze mortar that has been polished smooth by many evenings. Into it go lettuce seeds, a pinch of poppy, shaved myrrh, and 3 fragments from Senex's mysterious harvest. He grinds with patient circles, making a smell like dusty fields after sunset. You are given the pleasant work of warming wine with honey. The cup is small and thick, with a chipped rim that fits your thumb. A skin of steam rises into the lamp glow. Even failure smells comforting in a place like this. Then the Egyptian priest arrives without invitation and without knocking. He slips through the arch, in clean linen and temple perfume. From inside his robe, he produces a folded papyrus before anyone can sigh. He informs the room, gently but with enormous satisfaction, that Egyptian night remedies used owl down centuries earlier. Possibly 1,000 years earlier. Possibly 2. He has notes. He always has notes. You suspect he sleeps very well. The powder is stirred into your warm wine. It makes faint gray swirls, then disappears. You drink carefully. The taste is bitter first, then sweet, then oddly earthy, as if a quiet garden had dissolved in the cup. No one expects instant miracles. Ancient medicine is full of hope, ritual, and patient waiting. That is almost comforting. A modern bottle promises everything in 2 breaths. This place promises a clean blanket, a slower pulse, and perhaps fewer thoughts. Beside the lamp, a little dish of warm oil catches the light like amber syrup. Senex trims the wick with careful hands. He is trying to be useful from a respectful distance. Nobody sends him for night ingredients twice in the same week. For a while, the room grows quieter. The fountain counts its endless numbers outside. The papyrus rustles once. A cart passes somewhere in the lane. The apothecary begins to feel less like a shop and more like the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat. You rest your head against the clay wall for a moment. It is still warm from the day. The warmth travels through the shawl and into your neck. Your hands finally unclench around the empty cup. Then Morpheus himself seems to drift past the rear shelves, pale and mildly offended as usual. His eyes linger on the mortar. They linger on Senex's jar. He gives one long, weary sigh, as if humans keep trying to tag him in remedies he never approved. The priest folds his papyrus, and at last admits the mixture smells respectable. This is very near praise. Senex smiles with relief. One loose feather clings to his sleeve. He does not notice, and nobody points it out. Your eyelids begin their slow, heavy work. The remedy may be helping. The warmth may be helping. The fountain may be helping most of all. Ancient healers liked many ingredients, but steady water deserves a place on every tablet. The healer covers the jar again and slides it to the far shelf. It will stay there until morning, or until a future recipe grows bold. You do not ask for a second cup. Wisdom has limits, and so does Senex. The lamps burn lower. The amber light softens the shelves and the rows of sleeping herbs. Somewhere outside, the fountain keeps its small promise. In this warm room, even strange things gathered at night can be made gentle. The shelf stays shut, and the night at last feels ordinary again. Tonight, the healer warms a cup of dark wine and says you are ready for Helen's little secret. You sit on a low stool beside the cedar shelves. The terracotta floor still holds the day's heat under your sandals. Bundles of mint and poppy heads hang above you like sleepy bells. 2 oil lamps make the clay walls glow the color of toasted bread. A bronze spoon rests across the lip of a small pot. It smells of resin, honey, and something green after rain. Beyond the front arch, the fountain keeps up its patient dripping. It sounds like a clock invented by someone who preferred naps. Senex shuffles past with a tray of cups and 3 wrong lids. He apologizes before setting them down, which somehow makes the cups look nervous. The jar for tonight has a label in 2 hands. One says Nepenthe, and the other says, perhaps not for breakfast. You were promised sleep remedies from every shelf in Alexandria. You did not ask how many shelves there were. The healer taps the jar with 1 fingernail. Dust lifts softly and settles on his sleeve like fine flour. Nepenthe is the famous drink from the Odyssey. It is the one Helen of Troy served when sorrow made the room too heavy. In the poem, she stirs it into wine for her guests. After that, grief and anger slide away as neatly as sandals at bedtime. The old story is very calm about this. Imagine passing the olives, then forgetting your troubles between one sip and the next. For 2,000 years, people have argued over what was in that cup. Scholars love a mystery, especially one that comes with respectable drowsiness. Some suggest herbs that cheer the heart a little. Some suggest plants that make the room slightly more interesting than necessary. Mandrake always gets invited to these talks. So does henbane, which has the manners of a guest who stays too late. A few bring up sweet flag or wormwood. Others wander toward cannabis, which gives every age the same thoughtful squint. Poppy sits in the corner of the debate with perfect composure and very strong credentials. The most persuasive guess is an opium drink, likely softened in wine. Egypt knew poppy medicine well, and Helen got her drug from Egypt. At this point, the Memphite priest appears, exactly uninvited and perfectly on cue. He draws a papyrus scrap from his robe like a man producing thunder. He informs the room that Egyptian healers used such things long before Greek poets made them fashionable. He has citations, which he unfolds with the delight of a cat finding sunlight. The healer does not argue. He only nods and reaches for a small ceramic box with a lid tied in linen. Inside is a dark paste wrapped in waxed cloth. It looks humble, like something you might mistake for dates if you were reckless. You are not reckless now. You are a traveler in a clay-walled shop, and everyone has suddenly become very exact about spoon size. Opium in the ancient world often began with poppy sap. It dried into a gum that could be scraped, stored, and mixed again. A little could be stirred into wine or honey. A little too much could turn ancient melatonin into a full afternoon negotiation with the ceiling. The healer chooses a pea-sized bit with the tip of a spoon. Senex peers over his shoulder and is gently waved away from all measurements. Warm wine loosens the paste, honey rounds the bitter edge, and a pinch of spice gives the nose something friendly to notice first. You watch him stir in slow circles. The lamplight catches the surface, and the cup shines like polished chestnut wood. This part feels less like magic and more like kitchen work. Good ancient medicine often lived one shelf away from supper. That is one reason the Nepenthe idea holds together so well. A drink that eases pain, quiets anger, and invites sleep already existed in real jars. It also fits Helen herself rather nicely. In Homer, she is not dreamy or vague, but composed, practical, and strangely well-informed. She says the drug came from Polydamna in Egypt, a woman who knew many medicines. That tiny detail has kept classicists happily occupied for ages. If Helen learned from Egyptian experts, she learned from excellent ones. If she refined the blend herself, she had a very steady hand. And if she never explained the recipe fully, that also makes perfect sense. Healers guard good formulas the way cooks guard good sauces. Mystery helps too. A potion with a famous woman attached will always get better Yelp reviews on clay tablets. The cup reaches your hands, wrapped in a strip of linen. The cloth is warm, and slightly rough against your palms. You take a careful sip. First comes honey, then a thick floral bitterness, then the slow resin note of poppy. It is not pleasant exactly. It is more the sort of taste that expects to be respected.
The healer tells you Nepenthe may not have erased sorrow completely. Old poets like tidy claims, and old remedies like tidy advertising. More likely, it dulled the sharp edges of feeling. It let a troubled mind sit down without talking over itself. That alone can feel miraculous at night. A quieter mind makes a softer pillow out of very ordinary linen. Senex brings a folded cloth for your shoulders and nearly offers the wrong jar again. He catches the label at the last moment and apologizes to the shelf. Behind him, the mandrake pot is somehow closer to the door than before. Nobody mentions this, which remains the wisest policy. The priest has settled into a lecture about Egyptian sleep drafts. Even his voice grows cozy when he discusses proper storage conditions. He speaks of sealed jars, cool rooms, measured drops, and careful hands. Ancient pharmacy, like modern pharmacy, loves containers almost as much as cures. You finish the cup in 3 small swallows.
A ring of dark sweetness clings to the inside like varnish. Nothing dramatic happens, which is comforting. Your shoulders simply decide they have been working far too hard. The room seems wider and less urgent. The fountain finds a slower rhythm, or perhaps you finally join its rhythm. This is why the poppy answer keeps winning quiet support. Nepenthe does not need to be fantasy when chemistry can already do so much. It can soften pain. It can blur grief's sharp corners. It can tell anger to come back tomorrow, preferably after breakfast. Helen, on the available evidence, knew this perfectly well. She also knew there was no reason to hand out the full recipe to every guest. The healer takes back the cup and sets it upside down to dry. The lamps burn low, and the shelf of jars turns soft at the edges. For now, that is enough explanation for one evening. Even famous secrets can rest when the wine is warm and the fountain keeps dripping. Before you are even asleep, Senex is already sharpening a reed pen for the part where you start talking. Tonight's remedy is not a syrup or salve, but a waiting ear beside your pillow. After dusk, the apothecary feels softer, as if the jars have decided to whisper. You smell cedar dust, dried mint, warm oil, and the faint wet breath of the fountain outside. 2 oil lamps make slow amber pools on the terracotta floor tonight. Bundles of herbs hang from the low beams like upside-down gardens, waiting for manners. You sit on a narrow couch while the healer folds a linen under your head. He shakes the cloth once, smooths it twice, and decides that sleep prefers symmetry. A cup of watered wine waits on the stool beside you tonight. It tastes of resin, old grapes, and 1 leaf of something bitter that Senex cannot now identify. Senex apologizes before he speaks, which never improves the news very much. He thinks the jar held poppy, although it may have been pennyroyal or time-wearing confidence. He is not allowed near the locked chest anymore, and everyone in the room prefers this arrangement. You prefer it too, since you once saw him label cumin as quieting dust for dreams. Tonight, the healer explains a calmer method, borrowed from temples where sleep was watched like weather. In those places, scribes sat beside patients and wrote down every murmur before daylight interfered. You are to lie still, breathe slowly, and let your dream arrive with sandals it owns. The scribe will note your words, your turning hands, and any little frown that visits your face. Your own morning account will matter less than the neat lines made during the night. This seems unfair, though familiar, like waking to hear someone else reviewed your holiday. At dawn, the patient might insist the dream was about an uncle and figs. The physician would tap the tablet and prefer the earlier version. Set down before waking trimmed it. In Greek healing houses, this patient watching was called practice and careful medicine. In Egyptian temples, an uninvited priest would mention it was older by at least 1,000 years. As if summoned by that thought, the Memphite physician appears beneath the arch, with papyrus tucked inside his robe. He says nothing at first, because producing citations silently is one of his polished tricks. The healer sighs, accepts the scroll, and pretends not to read the date aloud. You admire this restraint, since scholarship in Alexandria behaves like a cat near fish. The priest informs you that temple sleepers sometimes heard gods in full speeches. The scribes, being scribes, reduced these meetings to phrases like,
Patient muttered about river, bird, light. One note might describe a vision of shining halls, perfumed air, and a grandmother made of stars. On the tablet, it becomes only, patient appeared moved and raised both hands during sleep. Another record says the sleeper spoke with a sacred crocodile who dispensed household advice in a rich baritone. The official line notes merely, some animal image occurred, significance to be judged by physician later. You begin to suspect the dream was the lively part, and the writing was the sandal strat. The temple record keeps everything tidy, even when the sleeper was likely touring the moon on borrowed legs. Still, there is something soothing in the system of being watched without being bothered. Someone stays awake for you, while you do the difficult work of wandering elsewhere. The healer places a wax tablet on the stool, then a second one, then a clean reed pen. He likes backups because dreams are slippery, and patients rarely repeat themselves with decent timing. The scribe is trained to hear the difference between prayer, a groan, and sleeping nonsense. It may be the first sleep clinic where snoring gets a spiritual reading and tidy handwriting. Beside the couch stands a little dish of honey cakes for the night staff. There is also water, a folded shawl, and a spare lampwick trimmed to a patient nub. These small details matter more than you might think when you are lending your sleep to experts. Comfort was part of the cure, which is the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat in linen form. If your review could be filed on clay tablets, you would praise the pillow and question the supervision. The Yelp reviews for dream interpretation were, historically speaking, mixed but very neatly copied. You lie down at last, with your sandals tucked beneath the couch, and your cloak folded by Senex. He folds garments with grave care, perhaps because cloth does not argue about labels. The linen against your cheek feels cool, then warm, then almost friendly. From outside comes the steady drip of the fountain, counting time with no interest in accuracy. Some temple rooms were darker than this, with walls painted in stars, snakes, and patient gods. Some offered incense of kaifi, honeyed wine, and a mattress that must have impressed even difficult shoulders. You imagine priests padding softly between sleepers, listening for holy mutters and practical coughing. One man dreams of healing hands, while another asks for onions, which are also written down. Sometimes a sleeper sat upright, pointed at empty air, then settled back down in calm. The note might say only, patient briefly rose, then resumed rest in a satisfactory manner. Nothing is wasted in a temple record, not a sigh, a snore, or a helpful scratch. If your left foot twitches at the moon, a trained hand will preserve the event for posterity, though it is a very nosy kind of dignity. Your sleeping self becomes public property for one thoughtful night, then returns at breakfast. At some point, Morpheus drifts past the back room and pauses near the couch. He looks mildly offended by the reed pen, as if dreams should arrive without clerical assistance. He glances toward the corner where the mandrake pot sits half a foot from yesterday's chalk line. No one mentions this, because ancient medicine allowed only so much honesty before supper. The healer lowers his voice and tells the scribe never to wake a patient for clarification. If the dream says purple fish are teaching law, then purple fish are teaching law. Morning can sort out the meaning, once the physician has enjoyed being wiser than the dreamer. For now, the task is only listening, and the room settles around you like warm clay. The healer reaches for the second key only after checking both lampwicks twice. That is how you learn this chest belongs to a slower part of the room. You sit on a low stool near the back wall, with your travel dust still on. Beyond the front arch, the fountain drips into the dark like a patient little clock. Bundles of dry herbs hang from the cedar beams, brushing shadows over the terracotta floor. 6 jars of cumin sit beside rose petals, garlic skins, bean flour, and dried lettuce. The chest itself is cedar too, rubbed smooth by many careful hands and many careful hesitations. It waits under the last shelf, beside the mandrake pot, which seems closer tonight. Senex has already brought it forward, breathing hard and apologizing before anyone accuses him. He is not allowed near the lock, or the key, or anything described as strengthening. Your healer clears a square of table with the neatness of a person avoiding future foolishness. He folds back a linen cloth, sets down 2 spoons, and straightens each one twice. Then he kneels and turns the key slowly,
as if haste itself were an ingredient. The metal gives a small, soft click that sounds much louder in lamplight. When the lid rises, a cool cedar smell slips out with wine, resin, and old honey. It is not a sharp smell, but a deep one, like sleep kept in storage. At the top lie 3 stoppered flasks for poppy milk, dissolved into dark, sweet wine. The glass is cloudy with age, and each neck is tied with blue thread. He tells you the white gum came from scored poppy heads at first light. It dried in little tears, then softened again in wine thickened with dates. This, he says, is for nights when thoughts keep patting in sandals around your head. Only a little is used, measured with a spoon smaller than a fingernail. You look at the spoon and feel both comforted and mildly insulted by its size. Ancient Greek melatonin, you think, now in convenient amphora form and smelling of rain. Below the flasks sit round jars of mixed sleeping draughts, sealed with wax and string. He calls them compound medicines, though later doctors will give them grander names. These early mixtures are cousins of the famous theriac that future physicians will praise tirelessly. For now, they are softer, more sleepy, and less interested in impressing emperors. One jar holds honey, poppy, fennel, myrrh, and a pinch of warm black pepper. Another folds in lettuce seed, wild rue, and a little syrup of unripe grapes. There is shredded lotus root in one packet, and coriander in another folded packet. Each mix promises calm by a slightly different road, which feels very human. The healer taps each seal before naming it, because names matter when jars look alike. Senex once labeled marshmallow root as fish powder, which confused everyone for a week. Under the jars lie little rolled pills, dark as figs and sticky with honey. These are for travelers, the healer says, because cups and mortars do not travel well. He shows you how one pill is wrapped in waxed linen against dust and damp. The wrapping is twisted closed, with threads so fine it looks like pale hair. In a side tray rest packets with names known only in the night markets. They are written in Greek letters, but the words come from Aramaic street talk. One is called something like sleep friend, though the healer admits the sound is slipperier. Another means night bread, which suggests either comfort or questionable bakery standards. At that moment, the Egyptian priest appears beneath the arch without any helpful warning at all. He announces that Egypt used poppy preparations 1,000 years earlier and has papyrus citations. As always, he produces those citations from somewhere inside his robes with practiced dignity. Your healer nods, accepts this weather pattern, and continues measuring without changing expression. The priest peers into the chest and sniffs at the Aramaic labels with deep suspicion. He says true sleep should smell of blue lotus and old temple stone. Your healer warms a little wine over the lamp until it barely steams at all. He scrapes a grain of poppy gum into it and watches it disappear. The spoon turns with slow circles against the cup, making a sound like small shells. He lets you smell it first, because strong things deserve an introduction before acquaintance. The scent is sweet, bitter, and sleepy, with something earthy hiding near the end. It smells like a garden after sunset, if the garden had opinions about dosage. He explains that compounded draughts try to guide sleep instead of clubbing it overhead. This is the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat, if clay tablets allowed reviews. From the lower tray he lifts a sealed pot meant only for stubborn wakefulness. It contains a thicker mix of syrup, resin, poppy, and herbs pounded to paste. This one is spread on bread, or licked from a spoon, or stirred into broth. He speaks the options gently, like a man listing blankets on a cold night. Once, he admits, a customer tried invoking Morpheus with Dormouse fat and a hymn. Right on cue, the god of dreams drifts past the doorway and sighs. He says nothing, because gods in this shop prefer judgment through posture and timing. The priest bows slightly, which looks less reverent than professionally annoyed. Before any more divine feedback arrives, the Roman matron sweeps in asking for something stronger. Your healer braces the nearest shelf with one hand before answering her very politely. He tells her the stronger things live in the back chest for a reason. She accepts a milder syrup, adjusts 3 bracelets, and leaves without breaking a jar. This is counted as a small miracle, and even Senex looks freshly encouraged by it. The mandrake in the corner now seems angled toward the door, which nobody remarks upon. At last the healer closes each jar, ties each thread and wipes the spoons clean. He returns every packet to its place with the care of folding winter clothes. The chest is not secret, he says, but it asks for patience and a steady hand. Some nights need lettuce water and warm feet, and some nights need cedar keys. He lowers the lid and turns the lock until the click becomes part of the room. Then the fountain drips again, the lamps breathe softly, and the night feels stored away. You can still picture a few small scenes from this long, strange shelf of cures. You remember the steam from the warm bath, rising in soft curls while the lamplight shook on the tiles. You remember the sharp green smell of crushed valerian, which promised sleep with all the grace of a damp root in a cellar. You remember the cup of honeyed milk with herbs floating on top, which looked reassuring until Senex squinted at the jar and apologized before he even picked it up. Somewhere in all of it was lavender and lettuce and poppy and oil for the temples, and that slow fountain beyond the arch, counting time better than any doctor. It has been, in its own way, the ancient world's 4-star sleep retreat, if your TripAdvisor review could be filed on clay tablets. Now the last clay jar is set aside. The last lamp is turned down to one thin thread of amber. The ring feels warm in the simple way that old walls hold warmth after dark. The night has weight now, and not an unpleasant one. It rests over you like the original weighted blanket experience, sponsored by the Temple of Hypnos and 2 moderately drunk goats. And in the corner, the mandrake waits in its chalk ring with the same quiet patience it had all evening. May your dreams be free of mandrake screams and the sound of Senex apologizing. May Morpheus find your offering of honeyed wine adequate, and your Dormouse fat foot rub go unquestioned. May the Egyptian priest never find you in a state where he can recommend papyrus citations. Thank you for listening. Keep your thoughts gentle, and good night.